Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, a place where science drifts slowly and curiosity is never in a hurry. Tonight, we are going to lean into one of the quietest and most haunting questions humanity has ever carried within its imagination. What if giants still walked among us? What if mammoths, the great woolly beings who shared this world with our ancestors, still pressed their shadows across the frozen landscapes of Earth? For a moment, let the thought settle gently in your mind. Close your eyes and picture it. A horizon of pale snow, a soft breath of wind, and against that silence, the slow rise and fall of enormous bodies moving as if time itself never passed them by. The idea feels like myth, like something etched into the edges of ancient memory. Yet these animals were as real as the soil beneath our feet. They lived here, not as fleeting visitors, but as neighbors who shaped landscapes, bent forests to their will, and left trails across ice that became the first roads for human survival. What if they were still here, grazing the tundra, reshaping entire valleys just by the rhythm of their lives? Would we see them as companions in wonder, or merely obstacles in our rush to move faster than the Earth allows? Mammoths belong to deep time, a span so layered that our human lifetimes seem like brief embers in the snow. When we speak of them, we are really speaking of the memory of the planet itself. Fossils pressed beneath permafrost are not just bones, but sentences written in the language of geology, recording isotope trails of oxygen and carbon, encoding stories of climate shifts that carried herds north and pushed hunters to follow. Each frozen carcass, preserved so vividly that even grass still lingers in its last mouthful, is a kind of time capsule, as if entropy itself paused to let us glimpse something we were never meant to see. And yet, the thought of them still living lingers because time is not always as linear as our minds crave it to be. In a way, each fossil is both past and present. Each tusk of ivory curving upward across museum halls is not lifeless. It is a ripple still echoing from an age we stepped out of but never fully escaped. Could it be that our memory of mammoths is itself a form of survival? That by remembering giants, we re-anchor ourselves in a larger story the Earth keeps telling. Even when silence buries the main chapters, we know, through science, that mammoths grazed in symphony with shifting climates. They fed on grasses that bent in wind, traced isotopic lines of rainfall and drought, and carried within their bones the very rhythm of glacial advance and retreat. Their world was not just white, not just barren snow. It was alive with lichen, moss, shrub, and the wide open steppe that once stretched across Eurasia like a hidden ocean of grass. And humans walked within it, small in comparison, but carrying fire, carrying stone, carrying memory wrapped in language. Think, just for a moment, how strange it must have felt for the first people who raised their eyes to see a mammoth move across the horizon. To know that this massive being was both threat and promise. To wonder how a creature so vast might fall, and whether it was even possible. Was there awe in their silence? Was there reverence in following the tracks of tusks greater than trees? And do we, thousands of years later, still carry some faint echo of that same reverence when we whisper their name? The Earth's memory does not keep time as we do. Rock layers sink, ocean floors are swallowed through subduction, eras fold into each other like drifting pages. And still, inside the slow sleep of permafrost, a mammoth remains, its cells caught between decay and preservation. Its story stretches through entropy, surviving not as life, but as something softer, an impression. What if this impression is more than fossilization? What if, on some level too deep for us to measure, the Earth itself does not lose memory, but repurposes it, carrying the scent of mammoth breath in isotopes, warming it into ice, dissolving it into rivers? Maybe giants do still walk, not because their bodies survived, but because their imprint continues to travel quietly through the systems that once sustained them. Their herds do not thunder anymore, but their weight still bends the planet's record. Their absence is not silence but a low background echo, like a vibration across our species' most distant memories. And if just one extinct creature can still shape the Earth's story in such profound ways, we are left with a question almost as heavy as the giants themselves. What other traces, what other shadows, might still linger, waiting beneath soil and frost for us to listen? And so, the footprints remain, not on the surface but pressed deep into frozen layers. They are not only mammoth footprints, but human footprints too, trailing side by side, stitched into the same page of glacial memory. We look down and we imagine walking beside them. And when we lift our eyes again, the ground becomes a quiet guide into the next question waiting beneath the snow. How do we read these frozen traces, these prints of two species locked together in survival? The story of early hunters does not begin with the roar of the hunt, nor the fall of a giant, but with something quieter, almost fragile, a simple footprint. Footsteps caught in frozen ground, pressed into mud that turned to ice, then sealed away for thousands of winters. These small depressions feel like whispers, shadows of movement, preserved not by intention, but by accident. And yet, they endure, carrying the weight of lives long vanished, so that even now, we can walk in their paths. When scientists uncover these frozen prints, it is as if time folds. You are no longer standing in a research trench, but in the very landscape of the Ice Age. The indentations curve forward, left then right, deeper here, lighter there. Sometimes a child's stride rests side by side with an adult's. Sometimes a mammoth track crosses diagonally, imprinting its weight into the same earth. Two species, bound together, leaving messages written in earth rather than ink. Archaeology becomes less about tools and weapons here, and more about listening to soil, to frozen mud, to subtle hints of weight rediscovered. Footprints are not just marks of where someone stepped. They are records of the pace of life itself. The depth of a heel shows if the walker was weary. A sudden shift shows where they turned, paused, or looked back. In this way, the footprints become a frozen film strip, silent but vivid. And when we study them alongside isotopes and pollen, we begin to see a fuller picture. How the ground was soft with meltwater, how reeds lined the edge of shallow ponds, how mammoths grazed alongside humans in the same passing hour. It is extraordinary to imagine these trails beneath us, covered by centuries of snow and silence, untouched until the permafrost slowly melted enough to reveal them. These trails are not only evidence of the living but also evidence of the climate that held them. The very fact that organic traces survived so long tells us about the power of glaciation, about the stillness of cold that arrests decay, about entropy slowed dramatically by ice. Each footprint is not just a person's step, but the planet's breath holding, refusing to erase. And what do we feel looking at them? Maybe awe, but also intimacy, because in these steps we find something oddly recognizable. The stride is human, like ours. The direction, purposeful. The pauses, the staggers, the moments of stillness. They remind us of how often we do the same, glancing back or leaning to rest. Thousands of years dissolve, and suddenly, across that frozen field, we are not alone. We walk beside them. We hear the hush of snow. We sense the quiet press of mammoth herds just beyond sight. Our breath seems to mingle with theirs. Footprints also blur the line between survival and memory. Were these hunters following mammoths, or simply moving between places of camp and water? Did they leave traces of a long pursuit, or just a morning crossing of the floodplain? We will never know every detail, and perhaps that is the deeper invitation of these impressions, that science can measure weight, direction, and distance but cannot measure emotion. It cannot tell us if the child placing its foot next to an elder laughed in that moment, or felt fear in the cold, or carried wonder at the sight of massive shapes on the horizon. What if memory itself, the part that recorded laughter and longing, is still hidden in ways we have no tool for? Think about how strange it is that footprints last at all. Most steps disappear instantly, washed by rain, erased by wind, overtaken by drifting sand or snow. And yet here, chance and climate conspired to keep them, allowing us to glimpse a fragment of something so ordinary, so fleeting, that normally it would vanish at once. Could it be that the ordinary is what the earth sometimes chooses to keep? Not speeches or monuments, but the simple record of walking. And maybe footsteps echo still, even when unseen. Each time the permafrost is disturbed, more trails reveal themselves. Hunters moving northward, families crossing river edges, mammoths heavy beside them, their paths crisscross, revealing a meeting place of two species within one landscape. Feels less like history and more like a page still turning. Because footprints are open-ended, they stop at the edge of excavation, continuing into the earth as if walking away forever. In following them, we are reminded that archaeology is not only about broken tools or mammoth tusks. It is about the unbroken thread between their lives and ours. We step into their rhythm, into their direction of travel, and for a moment we belong to their caravan. And here the question lingers: if soil can hold such delicate traces, almost impossible in their survival, then what other records are waiting underneath the tundra? Could the land itself be a living archive, filled not with written text, but with steps upon steps, pressed deep and waiting to surface again? We leave the footprints gently now, but they continue further into the ice, carrying us toward other clues, other remnants that survived where so much was lost. Marks carved not into ground, but into bone, records of hunts etched directly on the remains of giants. And that is where we must drift next, to read bones the way one might open a book, softly turning its silent pages. The footprints fade into frozen silence, but not all memory lives in the ground. Some was carried in hands, in skill, in patience, in the sharp brightness of stone. Tools of stone were more than just weapons. They were the drawn-out breath of humanity's awakening, memory made solid, thought carved into flint. Each strike against the core was both practical and ceremonial, even if the hunter did not call it so, for to shape stone was to shape survival itself. Imagine holding a piece of raw rock freshly broken from a riverbank or quarry. It is heavy, brittle, unformed, yet within it lies a hidden geometry waiting to be revealed. Early humans learned to see beyond the surface, to strike at angles that brought edges to life. A hammerstone risping against flint produced flakes that gleamed like crafted light. Every shard was more than just material. It was time embodied. It was patience, waiting for the right edge, waiting for the rhythm of fracture, waiting for skill to turn stone into memory passed from hand to hand. Archaeologists now read these chipped surfaces the way one might read pages in an ancient book. The scars left by knapping reveal not just technique, but hesitation, experiment, even accident. Some flakes fall unevenly. Some show hesitation in the hands. Others reveal mastery, a clarity of motion honed through repetition, through the seasonal cycle of practice by the fire. And in these variations, we hear not just the breath of one individual, but the long whisper of tradition, methods taught, imitated, and refined across countless years. Stone tools were not only for cutting or piercing flesh. They were the bridge between vulnerability and survival. With them, humans carved through mammoth hide, separated sinew from bone, shaped wood into spears, and scraped skins warm enough to blanket an ice-age winter. But they also carved memory, symbols on ivory, patterns etched on antler, the practical blurred with the sacred in ways we may never fully understand. Could it be that, in shaping a tool, early humans were also shaping themselves, shaping awareness, intention, imagination? There is a stillness hidden here. To wait for a mammoth, one must be patient. Not restless, but steady, aware of silence as much as sound. The flint echoes the same rhythm. One cannot rush the shaping of stone, just as one cannot rush the herd's passage. The strike must be precise, the preparation deliberate. Histories were sharpened one blow at a time, as sure as feet pressed into snow, as sure as fire turned darkness into radiance. And yet, when we pick up these tools today, found in frozen soils or riverbeds, we feel not only purpose but intimacy. A hand once held this weight exactly as we do. A thumb once rubbed this smooth ridge. The oil of long-vanished skin still faintly lingers, absorbed where grip was firm and repetitive. Thousands of lifetimes collapse into that single moment of recognition. You hold what they held. You feel what they felt. Not imagination, but continuity through touch. We also know that these tools tell stories about migration. Different rock, different fracture, isotope lines crossing landscapes. A core of obsidian might have come from far away, carried across valleys and frozen rivers, changing hands, changing meaning. Tools were not just things. They were travelers themselves, moving with people, binding communities together in exchange networks of survival and memory. Flint, obsidian, chert, each was both practical matter and symbolic map. Perhaps they were the first companions, artifacts with journeys of their own. But what if tools themselves hold memory in ways deeper than we can measure? Not in the mystical sense, but in geological time. A chipped core can last as long as mountains. Unlike bones, unlike flesh, unlike even footprints, stone resists entropy for as long as rock endures. A tool found today may look almost unchanged from the day it left its maker's hands. It is as if the earth itself conserves these artifacts as living reminders. Even when almost every other trace is gone, the sharp edge remains. In this sense, the mammoth hunt is alive before it begins. The tools themselves were already rehearsals, fragments of the hunt taking shape in shards of flint long before spears struck hide. Planning bled into objects. Objects bled into action. Action bled into memory. Every step of preparation was a continuation of shaping, not only of stone, but of human minds aligning with patience, silence, and calculation. And like footprints, tools are incomplete stories. They do not tell us everything. They do not confess what succeeded and what failed. They rest as suggestions, fragments of intent without conclusion. Perhaps that is why they draw us so deeply into wonder. They raise questions more than they answer them. What did the hunter feel, standing with a freshly chipped blade against the waist, watching the herd move in the distance? Was pride there, or fear more than pride? Was survival always just survival, or did it already begin to feel like ritual? The quiet persistence of these stones is comforting and unsettling at the same time. Comforting because they remind us that human presence, even in its most ancient form, survives. Unsettling because they remind us, too, of how little endures beyond the hard, beyond the nearly indestructible. Our stories fade. Our memories dissolve into silence. But the stones remain, patient, carrying on without us. And so we drift from stone to bone, from the tool to the hunted itself. For if edges can survive, then so, too, can the scars they leave behind. On mammoth remains across frozen plains, there are marks carved by these very tools, records of human determination cutting into the body of the giant. If tools are silent, bones are less so. They speak of impact, of struggle, of the intimate contact between predator and prey. And so next, we will lean close to listen, reading bones the way one might read a book, allowing their scars to tell stories that words have long forgotten. Bones wait in the earth like pages sealed in silence, lying for thousands of years until they are gently uncovered by wind, thaw, or human hands. When we come upon them, they are never blank. They carry quiet inscriptions, etched not in ink but in grooves and scratches, in fractures and wear. Like books that have weathered ages, mammoth bones preserve stories written by more than one author. Some marks made by the teeth of wolves, others by the blades of humans, others still by the slow press of ice and sediment. To read these remains is to engage with a long dialogue across time. Scientists lean close, studying femurs blunted with tool marks, tusks scored by scraping, ribs split with deliberate fractures. Each scar is a sentence. Perhaps it tells of a spear thrown into muscle, dragging a sharp line across bone. Perhaps it records the slow gnaw of scavengers who came long after the hunt had ended. Like scholars of language, researchers separate meaning, teasing apart the punctuation of predation, the syntax of human craft. The bone becomes a script, and the earth an old archive. Some bones tell of ambush, where a sudden strike pierced flesh and left clean traces beneath. Others tell of patient waiting, of herds drawn into muddy ground where heavy bodies faltered, weakened, and bones shattered under their own weight. Some show patterns of butchery, the careful slicing that reveals method passed down through generations, an anatomy learned not from books but from necessity. In the curvature of a tusk worn by repetitive scraping, we sense not a single kill but a rhythm of survival, recurring, remembered. In this way, bones are both evidence and echo. Evidence of what happened, echo of what cannot be said. Because the bones themselves do not record intention. They preserve only consequence. And so we are left to wonder, what whispers passed in the cold before the strike? Was the herd silent when the first spear flew, or did trumpet calls carry into the sky? Did the hunters feel pride at the fall, or something heavier, knowing how magnificent a life had just been ended? We speak of bones clinically, rib, scapula, tibia, yet there is something unavoidably intimate in their reading. Each groove requires the scientist's gaze, almost like fingertips caressing letters on a page. Each cut is paused over, studied, questioned. The relationship between hunter and prey lingers in that moment of recognition. The two species are tied together, not only by need but by touch, human touch shaping stone, stone shaping bone, bone shaping memory. The chemistry of these remains adds deeper notes still. Isotope analysis traces what the mammoths ate, which valleys they crossed, which seasons they endured before collapse. Carbon and nitrogen whispers tell if winters were harsh, if grasses were wide or scarce, if climates tilted suddenly warmer or colder. Oxygen signals hint at water sources too ancient to be remembered otherwise. Layered within their bones, the mammoths carried the memory of entire landscapes, unwittingly becoming archivists of vanished environments. And yet, even these records are fragmented. Bones rot. Some dissolve under rivers, some fracture with freeze-thaw. Entropy insists on silence, breaking the script into scattered fragments we must piece together. What we read is partial at best, continuous at worst only in imagination. Science builds the outlines, but inside those outlines resides speculation, where awe and humility keep us company. Perhaps it is here that bones move beyond the scientific into the existential. For to read bone is to admit that we will one day be bone. That time will press upon us the same silence we now read in them. But where mammoths endured in permafrost, what will endure of us? Concrete, metal, radiation, plastics. Our bones are different. Our scripts written in technofossils that one day may be read by others with the same hushed curiosity. The mammoth's rib becomes not just a specimen but a mirror. We see our reflection in it, sudden and fragile. Fragile because once too we might be reduced to marks of survival, marks of striving, marks shaped by accidents and intentions half forgotten. The bones ask us, how do you wish to be remembered, when all that may remain of you are grooves and traces on the deeply buried surface of the earth? And still they are beautiful in their endurance. Curved ivory arcs, massive, spiraling, carrying both the aesthetic of nature and the practical scars of survival. These ivory scrolls bend through time, bridges between living memory and geologic witness. Standing in their presence, whether in a windswept dig site or under quiet museum lights, feels like listening to a frozen choir that does not sing in sound, but in silence audible to the patient imagination. The marks we find are never the end of the story. Behind them waits the context of ice, the patience of glaciers, the environmental stage on which both mammoth and human moved. The tools made by hands left scars, but the ice shaped the grand theater where such encounters could unfold. And so, from bones, we must now turn to the land itself. The frozen expanses and valleys where time slowed long enough for giants to move across the earth, and where hunting became a story beneath the breath of glaciers. The Ice Age was both cradle and obstacle, a vast stage of cold where survival meant adaptation not in moments, but across generations. When we speak of this time, we are speaking of landscapes that moved more slowly than breath. Glaciers stretching like continents, mountains groaning under the weight of frozen centuries, rivers carved not by rain but by ice grinding itself forward with patient inevitability. This patience was not gentle. It was relentless, reshaping valleys, sculpting plains, and forcing life to bend or vanish. For early humans, the cold was both enemy and teacher. It stripped comfort away, pared life down to essentials, and demanded ingenuity at every turn. Firelight was not just warmth. It was existence, flickering against walls of snow, casting fragile halos into darkness that stretched for months at a time. Wrapped in hides, huddled close, families sat in the tremor of cold winds and learned to wait. Waiting was survival. Waiting was what ice itself taught. Endurance in stillness, strength in silence. We imagine valleys where herds of mammoths passed slowly, their bodies massive yet vulnerable against the scale of endless white. Grassland stretched across what is now ocean, wide steppes swallowing horizon after horizon. And yet, for all its expanse, the world must have felt confined, trapped between advancing ice behind and unknown lands beyond. For every step forward, risk lurked, storm, starvation, collapse. Yet humans moved, carried by instinct, by resourcefulness, by memory of fire and the promise of meat that giants could give. The geology of this frozen age left its record etched into rock and core. Ice preserves more faithfully than any paper, holding dust from volcanoes, traces of ash, the isotopic breath of ancient atmospheres. By reading them today, scientists hear the pulse of climate, the long drumbeat of cycles where warmth rose then vanished again into glacial silence. Within these records we see not just the cold, but how life adjusted, how migrations traced routes along ice-free corridors, how patience itself became a kind of skill passed down like a tool. There is a quiet grandeur in imagining those frozen nights. The crackle of fire, the faint orange ring trembling against walls of snow, silence vast enough to make every sound feel fragile, the crunch of footsteps in frost, the low hush of wind carrying powder across the ground, the occasional call of creatures unseen in the darkness. We can almost hear breath, slow and careful, shared by humans who must have wondered if they could make it through another cycle of cold, and by mammoths whose heavy coats and massive bulk gave them the endurance of giants. For both, the ice was not backdrop but destiny. It shaped bodies. Humans carried thicker muscle, wider noses to warm air before breath. Mammoths grew woolly coats, fat stores, tusks that cleared snow for feeding grasses below, and it shaped minds. To live in ice required forethought, planning hunts, storing food, sharing warmth. Cooperation was not luxury but essence. Perhaps, in this way, the Ice Age sculpted the quiet persistence we now call human. Still, we should not romanticize the patience of ice. It was also hardship without mercy. Children born in midwinter faced odds against them. Hunters who missed their mark felt the full weight of scarcity. Fires consumed fuel quickly, and fuel meant survival. And yet, what emerges from this long struggle is not only resilience, but imagination. We painted walls inside caves while blizzards raged outside. We carved mammoths in ivory while winds howled. We made meaning even when survival alone should have taken all attention. The patience of ice gave birth, in its still pressure, to creativity and thought. When entropy slows, when decay halts, what waits in silence grows heavier inside the human spirit. Perhaps that is why the Ice Age nourished not only flesh but story. The giants walked amid snow, and the humans who watched them walked also into myth. The two lives entwined by difficulty, recorded not just in footprints and bones, but in the memory of the earth itself. Hidden deep in permafrost, sealed in cores, whispered across millennia into our own restless questions. And as we picture the stillness of those valleys, where the cold loomed larger than the sky, one quiet thought lingers. Patience always leaves traces. Ice taught it, mammoths embodied it, and humans learned it in the frost of every breath they took. But if the ice can preserve this much, footprints, bones, whispers of air, then perhaps patience itself is written into the planet's memory, waiting for us to read. And so, the firelight fades across those endless plains, and we drift from the still weight of glaciers to the living motion of herds. For if the ice demanded patience, then understanding the mammoth required something more, a recognition of the mind of the herd, and how humans mirrored it in their own survival. To hunt a mammoth was never only about strength. It was as much an act of understanding as it was of pursuit. These were not creatures that wandered aimlessly, nor herds that moved in chaos. Mammoths carried minds evolved across millennia of migration, instincts tuned to survival within shifting climates, social bonds knit as carefully as our own. To approach them meant listening closely, watching how they clustered, how they protected, how they chose when to move and when to rest. Early humans became students of giants, observers of herd logic. In return, mammoths became mirrors, teaching us as much about ourselves as about them. Herd life was structure. The oldest females led, guiding groups across frozen plains toward seasonal feeding grounds, toward valleys where grasses still bent beneath frost. The young huddled inward for safety, shielded by walls of tusks and bodies. When threatened, mammoths closed ranks, forming circles of defense that turned strength into cooperation. It was this very instinct, this choreography of survival, that hunters had to decipher. To scatter them was almost impossible. To isolate the weak required patience, collaboration, quiet communication as subtle as the herd's own language of trumpets and low rumbles. Watching a mammoth herd was to witness intelligence shaped not in words, but in movement. They remembered waterholes from seasons past, remembered the frozen routes through valleys that survived between shifting glaciers. Their paths were memory made physical, carved by repetition, passed down from mother to daughter. Humans, too, were learning memory on these landscapes, tracing routes, holding knowledge not through instinct but through culture, through song, story, gesture. Perhaps in studying the mammoth we came to understand our own patterns of leadership, of family, of belonging to something larger than the individual. There is something deeply resonant in imagining early humans camped on the edge of a snow plain, firelight dim against the vast dark, watching the herd move across the horizon, silhouettes swaying, tusks gleaming pale under the moon. The people huddled together, whispering, pointing, already learning not just how to throw a spear, but how to move as one, how to imitate the circling protection that guarded the mammoth calves. Could it be that in those silent observations, a lesson emerged, that survival itself belongs not to the strong alone, but to the cooperative, the attentive? Archaeological traces echo this possibility. Sites show not just hunting, but planning. A circle of hunters encircling the frozen pond where tracks of mammoths lingered, spears positioned from multiple angles. Evidence that no single hand could have felled a giant alone. Took strategy, shared memory, the ability to anticipate movement as if stepping into the herd's thought itself. When we speak of early intelligence, perhaps it is here most visible. In learning to inhabit another mind, to predict without words, to sense through empathy what even a giant might do next. Science today confirms what hunter and mammoth already knew. Intelligence is not only individual. Musk oxen, elephants, primates, all thrive in networks of thought, in bodies of many bound into one. Mammoths, with their intricate social structures and long gestation, invested deeply in the survival of group over individual. Humans, smaller, weaker, but quicker to adapt, found their survival in echoing the same. Cooperation was not imitation but parallel evolution, a recognition that to endure Ice Age winters demanded more than fire and stone. It demanded minds thinking in rhythm, and yet it was never equal. To understand the herd was to exploit it. The very patterns that saved mammoths became their vulnerability. Hunters who knew they would circle to protect their young could plan around that devotion. Hunters who anticipated a migration could lie in wait where herds always passed. Knowledge was a gift, but also an edge. Mammoth loyalty became mammoth weakness. Human perception became human strength. And between the two, balance tilted toward our species, reshaping the future of giants who had once seemed eternal. Still, we cannot disentangle understanding from awe. The hunters must have felt it, that these were not beasts of blind instinct, but beings with memory and emotion. Fossilized remains hint that mammoths, like their elephant descendants, may have mourned their dead, lingering around fallen calves, circling bones. Could it be that when humans stood over a mammoth brought down, they were not only victorious, but unsettled, seeing in the herd's grief a glimpse of their own? Reflections cast across species, in snow and silence. To hunt a mammoth, then, was to study, to mirror, to learn. In their formations, humans traced the first outlines of strategy. In their migrations, humans found models of endurance. In their cries, perhaps, echoes of our own voice long before language as we know it fully formed. Mammoths shaped us, just as we shaped their fate. Two minds entangled on frozen landscapes, both bound to memory, both capable of cooperation, both carrying futures neither could foresee. We leave the herd quietly in our imagination now, circling under the watch of its matriarch, young pressed safe within. Hunters wait at a distance, plans forming in silence. The land is still, but the coming moment will not be. As firelight flickers in human camps, as shadows of tusks drift across the horizon, we draw closer to the hunt itself. The ambush prepared at water's edge, where patience would meet strategy in the still theater of survival. Hunting was rarely noise, rarely chase, rarely fury. More often, it was silence. A long, drawn-out stillness where every breath mattered, every movement risked the collapse of an entire plan. And nowhere was this stillness heavier than at the water's edge. In the Ice Age, waterholes were more than drinking places. They were gathering points, crossroads of survival, where humans and mammoths and countless other species came not by choice, but by necessity. To live was to find water, and to find water was to enter into a theater older than any story we tell. Imagine night bending low across the frozen steppe, the last glow of sun fading violet over glacier-blue horizons. A pool lies near the base of a valley, its edges crusted with frost, rippling faintly under the weight of wind. Somewhere in that cold vastness, a herd of mammoths has begun to drift closer, driven by thirst, by memory, by routes their ancestors had walked for centuries. And near the reeds, hidden almost entirely in the dark, move their shadow companions, the hunters, waiting without sound, without light, without even the freedom to shift in the cold. Minutes stretched into hours in that waiting. To strike too soon was to scatter the herd. To move too loudly was to erase the chance forever. So the humans learned patience from the very landscape itself. Glaciers waited centuries to move. Rivers froze for months before thaw. Wind carved valleys slowly, without hurry. The ambush at the water's edge was an echo of this same rhythm. Still, silent, unrelenting in its need for timing. Archaeological evidence suggests many hunts may have taken place at these waterholes. The soil itself remembers. Mammoth footprints pressed deep in mud, human tracks circling low at the margins. Bones found clustered near ancient marshland, tusks broken where weight pulled them down into sucking ground. In these patterns, we glimpse strategy beyond chaos, driving giants where water betrayed them, where the heaviness of their own survival turned into weight against them. Soft mud became a trap, and the hunters, silent witnesses to that slow drama, became its final actors. But the science of the site can only tell us so much. We must imagine the human experience, the hush of it. We must imagine the children waiting at higher ground, the elders whispering, the firelight far away, shielded so it would not flicker out across the ice. We must imagine cold hands tightening on spears, stone edges fitted carefully into sockets of bone or wood, and above all, the stillness of lungs, breath pulled in, held, paused, a patience so total that even the earth seemed caught in suspension. When the mammoths arrived, they must have carried their own music. The low rumble of their voices, the soft percussion of feet pressing snow, the weight of herd movements settling into the air. Water stirred under their trunks as they drank, steaming faintly in the contrast of temperature. To hear this, to feel this, to know that each sound drew closer to the single fragile moment when a life could be taken, it must have stretched human nerve into something beyond itself. Is the hunter's trembling hand a sign of fear or of reverence? Can the two be separated? The marks on bones tell us that spears were thrown here, sharp stone breaking through hide into muscle, some striking true, others deflected by flesh too thick. Wounds opened, blood steamed against snow. But what lingers most is not the strike. It is the lead-up, that waiting, that held collective breath shared by hunters and herd alike, as if the very air, thick with frost, refused to move until one side acted. The ambush was less about sudden violence and more about this long suspension of time, a threshold between stillness and chaos. Even now, waterholes across tundras hold silence that feels like memory. Birds drink there, elk pause. Winds curve reeds into the same patterns they did when mammoths walked past. Sometimes, we might wonder if the earth remembers what happened at these thresholds. If the particles of soil retain the vibration of trumpets and shouts. If entropy does not erase but instead diffuses memory across the land. Could it be that each time a pool shivers in winter stillness, it carries within it a faint reenactment of hunters watching unseen? The patience of these hunts shaped us. It trained a kind of discipline, not rushing toward hunger, but waiting for that one fragile alignment when the world itself seemed to pause. It taught coordination, where one movement wrong could bring disaster, but one movement right could change life for weeks, feeding the group, securing survival. Here strategy deepens, but so does philosophy. For patience at the water's edge was not only a tactic, it was a worldview. The land gives when it is ready, not when we demand it. The herd moves when it must, not when we wish it. The human path is not control, but quiet preparation until the moment arrives. Perhaps this is why, in telling the story of the Ice Age, we return so often to these ambushes. They are not simply hunts. They are reflections of human humility in the face of vast forces, of mammoth herds beyond our ability to dominate, of landscapes we could only borrow, never command. The hunters crouching in the reeds did not yet know it, but their stillness mirrored the patience of ice itself. Long suspense, waiting until time allowed movement, until destiny unfolded. And so we leave them here, crouched in silence, hidden under stars, listening to the water ripple under huge trunks dipping for drink. Spears are ready. Fire waits unseen. But before the strike, before the moment of noise, there is only the long hush of survival suspended. The only fire burning now is internal, the human will held in check by the vast patience of the earth itself. Soon, fire will leave the shadows and meet the herd. Smoke will bend into the winds, unsettling giants. The still theater of the waterhole will transform. And it is there, in that strange meeting of flame and frost, that the next chapter waits. Fire enters the story like a third presence, neither mammoth nor human, but something older, more powerful, and infinitely dangerous. To imagine its role in the hunt is to picture not only heat and flame, but smoke drifting low, curling into the air, reshaping instinct itself. For mammoths, fire was never part of their world. They had evolved with cold, their lives set within snow, ice, grass, and the rhythms of frost. To meet flame upon the tundra must have been a kind of dissonance, an interruption of the familiar order. Some archaeologists suggest that early hunters may have used fire as more than warmth or light. They may have wielded it in strategy, pushing herds toward chosen paths, unsettling their sense of safety, nudging giants toward the waiting spears. A branch lit at its end was not just a burning stick. It was fear embodied, confusing even the most coordinated of herds. Smoke itself became a weapon, drifting across eyes and trunks, breaking the trust the herd placed in the night air, tipping balance away from stability into hesitation. And hesitation, at the scale of a mammoth hunt, was everything. But fire was never neutral. It has always lived on a narrow threshold between comfort and ruin. For early humans, it was the thin border between death by cold and survival through warmth. Preserved meat, it hardened spear shafts. It glowed as symbol in caves, painted alongside the mammoths themselves. Yet once unleashed, it was also untamed. Grasslands burned if sparks spread too far. Forest fringes vanished into smoke. Even a single ember had the power to destroy that which it was meant to save. To bring fire into a hunt was to invite both enemy and ally to the same field. Picture the scene. The herd gathers near water. Hunters shift low against the ground, waiting. And then a flicker, torchlight raised from the reeds. Mammoths stir, uncertain. Rumbles pass among them. They tighten formation as instinct dictates, drawing calves inward. But the smoke drifts, the flames move, their circles tighten too far, and confusion ripples like a wave. For a moment, even these giants feel small before a phenomenon that does not yield to bulk, to tusks, or to herd memory. In that disarray, hunters rush forward. Fire was not just heat, it was imbalance. An imbalance could tip even a giant into collapse. There is an echo here, beyond hunting tactic, into something deeper. Fire has always been a mirror of our own nature. Creative, destructive, patient, sudden. In using it to unsettle the mammoths, humans were also testing themselves, learning to command not only the material world but also the psychological. To bend the emotions of creatures larger than themselves was an expression of power unlike any before it. We were not stronger than the mammoth. We were not faster, But with fire, we could influence, manipulate, even control. Fire was strategy not of flesh, but of mind. And perhaps this is why fire carries such weight in the symbolic memory of humanity. This glow was more than survival. It was a way of taking fear and reversing it. To wield fire was to hold something once terrifying and make it serve. To stand before a mammoth, torch in hand, was to embody that reversal. That controlled flame not only protected against cold nights, but also unsettled the largest beings the earth had known. Scientists tell us fire use by humans dates back far before this, to hundreds of thousands of years earlier. But what it meant in relation to giants like mammoths was evolution in another sense. A kind of rehearsal for the power we would one day extend over entire ecologies, climates, even Earth systems. Fire was not just fuel. It was a teacher. It taught that once fear becomes controlled, it transforms into something entirely different. Agency. But still, fire is never fully ours. It escapes, consumes. It lingers in smoke long after it is gone. And when we imagine herds scattering, tusks glinting in panic, trumpets carrying into the frozen sky, we must ask, did the hunters too feel a tremor of fear at what they had unleashed? Did they know they had welcomed not just a tool, but a force that could one day exceed even them? For a moment in the hunt, flame danced between species, between giants threatened and humans surviving. And as sparks trailed upward into the sky, it was not clear whether what they had wielded was victory or warning. Fire could protect, but it could just as easily consume all sides alike. The torchlight dims now in our imagination. The air clears into still smoke. And where once flames unsettled giants, what remains are the tools themselves, the weapons shaped long before the strike. Spears sharpened, balanced, waited for the exact moment of release. They were not fire, but they carried their own kind of memory. And it is to the spear, and the way it embodied thought and survival, that we must now drift. The torchlight fades into smoke, and what remains in a hunter's hand is the spear. Simple to us now, perhaps, when reduced to fragments of wood and broken tips unearthed by archaeologists. But in its time, the spear was more than weapon. It was continuity. It was inheritance. It was memory shaped into a sharpened form, passed from one generation to another like a flame that never went out. Each spear carried layers of knowledge folded into its construction. To choose the wood was an act of understanding. Some trees bent too easily, others splintered under strain, while certain trunks gave just the strength and balance needed. To split, shape, and fire-harden the shaft required patience, a rhythm joined to nature's own cycles. To fix the tip, whether of stone or of splintered bone, or even of ivory carved and polished, was to seal memory into matter. Every hunter who used it bore not only their own craft, but the skills of countless others who had struck stone before, who had tested throw against flesh, who had refined angle and weight through failure and success. When archaeologists uncover these points today, flaked or polished, they read them like we read words etched across time. The angle of fluting reveals not just technique but intention. The fracture lines show the moment of use, the instant of impact. Some points broke on contact, buried still inside the bones of mammoths who fell to them. Others remain pristine, never thrown, witnesses to hunts perhaps abandoned, or threats that passed by. In their geometry we see not accidents but artistry, and behind artistry, story. Think of what it meant to a young hunter holding the spear for the first time. It was not merely tool but extension of body, of family, of ancestry. To wield it was to step into a lineage. Every throw connected him to those who had stood in frost before, who had watched mammoths shifting across the steppe, who had discussed, whispered, cautioned, and instructed. The spear was strength, yes, but more profoundly it was belonging. Spears also taught balance in the truest sense. For a spear too heavy falters, too light drifts off course. The act of making one required harmony between materials, the resilience of wood, the sharpness of flint or ivory, the binding strength of sinew, resin, or pitch. A hunter who carried it carried a fragment of nature reshaped by human thought. Wood from the tree, stone from the mountain, sinew from prey, fire shaping them all. In this single object, the earth itself had been gathered, united into focus. When thrown, it was more than attack. It was a conversation between human intention and elemental memory. And so we might wonder, did spears themselves hold meaning beyond survival? Rituals, perhaps. Carvings etched in the shaft, marks to guide grip or to carry symbolic weight. Did hunters see spears as companions, extensions not only of hand but of spirit? Could it be that, in the long silence of the hunt, the spear gave courage, as torchlight once did, a reminder that they were not empty-handed before giants? The science reminds us that these spears endured long beyond their makers. In waterlogged soils, in permafrost, in dry caves, their points are still sharp enough to cut. Stone resists entropy better than flesh. Ivory hardens through ages. Even wood, fragile as it is, can survive if preserved within the kindness of anaerobic mud. Thousands of years pass, but the spear's edges wait quietly, as if aware that they would be found and studied once again. Not to kill this time, but to be read. And perhaps that is their greatest legacy. Not only survival in their own time, but the ability to continue serving as memory in ours. A broken point inside a mammoth's rib is not mere artifact. It is proof of encounter, evidence of a moment where human will and animal strength collided. It is story that belongs to both species, frozen mid-sentence, carried forward for us to rediscover. And when we hold such a point carefully preserved under glass, do we not feel what it once meant? The weight of survival, the certainty of a throw, the hope of returning to the camp with life secured for the group. There is quiet poetry in knowing that every spear once waited, just as the hunter waited for the right moment when herd and strategy aligned, when stillness broke into action. In this way, spears became not only weapons of use, but metaphors of patience, sharpened into form. To grasp one was to grasp more than wood, more than stone. It was to grasp time itself, condensed into an object that carried past and future both. And now, as we hold our gaze across millennia, we see the next unfolding truth. If a spear carries story, then the bones it struck carry answer. Spears inscribed, bones replied. Together they formed a dialogue across species, traced into scars and fractures that endure still. So as the spear arcs in imagination across frozen plains, we follow it to where it lands, not only in flesh, but into history itself. And thus our journey drifts naturally toward those long pursuits, those chases into silence, where weapon and will met the giant upon its last breath. The spear has been cast, but not every hunt ended in a single moment. Some stories whisper of a longer struggle, less sudden than an ambush, drawn out across snowy plains where time itself stretched thin. Did humans, thinner and more enduring than giants, rely on a different kind of strength, endurance? The possibility lingers, that we chased, not with speed, but with patience, following until exhaustion broke the mammoth's strength. Endurance hunting is a practice still known among some cultures, where humans outlast animals far swifter and stronger. For though our bodies are small, our lungs are wide, our sweat cools us, our will sustains us across length of distance. The mammoth, carrying immense weight, draped in thick wool, adapted for cold but not pursuit, may have faltered over time, each step heavier than the last, until the shadow of hunters finally matched stride beside it. Could it be that our species, fragile though we seemed, overcame giants not through power, but through unrelenting slowness? The Snow Age landscape left little room for haste. Plains stretched vast and shimmering under pale skies. Winds scoured across permafrost, carrying away voices, softening each step in silence. To imagine such a chase is to imagine something less like violence and more like meditation. The rhythm of gait upon snow, breath controlled and steady. The line of figures moving not just in pursuit of prey, but in pursuit of their own limits. The mammoth moved and humans moved with it. Each became mirror to the other. One fleeing, one following, both caught in the endless patience of distance. Perhaps this was not hunt alone, but dialogue. The mammoth's strength resisting, the human's stamina persisting, each passing hour thinning advantage and disadvantage into something more symbolic. How much endurance can a giant hold? How long a silence can a human walk? When exhaustion finally broke one, the balance would fall. But in the long in-between, across hours without sudden collision or loud roar, there was only the quiet companionship of survival, both parties stretching themselves further than before. Science finds only fragments of truth here. Certain bone patterns suggest catastrophic collapse. Sometimes sudden, perhaps from ambush, sometimes gradual, as though weariness overtook the animal before the final strike. Isotopes in tusks reveal migration lines, long, punishing distances carved into years. Archaeology offers bones cracked for marrow, but not always the clear answer of how the chase began or ended. In this absence, speculation becomes its own kind of story, our minds filling silence with the rhythm of imagined steps. What is certain is that both species were shaped by endurance. Humans learned cooperation in the chase, passing signals, trading positions, sharing knowledge of terrain. Mammoths endured in their own way, migrating across glacial corridors, surviving winters by memory of beyond-horizon valleys. This endurance sculpted muscle, but it also sculpted mind. To wait, to last, to persist became as evolutionary as fangs or tusks. Survival did not belong to the fastest. It belonged to the ones who could keep going when others fell away. There is something existential here, something nearly spiritual. The chase is not far from the human experience of time itself. We rise, move forward, meet resistance, survive by persistence. We exhaust the years even as they exhaust us. Perhaps, in their way, the mammoths felt it too, the lengthening burden of each migration, the slow patience of glaciers pressing down. In following them, humans were chasing more than animals. They were chasing time, testing themselves against the measure of the Earth's breath. Silence must have grown heavy during these long pursuits. Hunters walked without shouts, conserving breath. Mammoths moved with rumbling steps that grew fainter, less frequent. The world became a low heartbeat, broken only by wind. To witness a collapse after such a distance would not have been thunderous triumph, but soft unraveling, as if a weight lifted from the land itself. The hush of finality, the end of motion, giants overcome, not in sudden attack, but in a slow blending into silence. And in that silence, what stayed with the humans who walked back, carrying meat, carrying bone? Was it pride or a strange unease? For the chase reflected them, and in the mammoth's fall, they may have glimpsed the fragility of their own bodies extended beyond limit. Each hunt was a mirror. Each ending was also a reminder. No strength lasts forever. Not theirs. Not ours. The footprints of such chases are long gone now, erased by thaw, by dust, by the passage of new centuries. But the question endures, just as the silence endures. Did we outlast giants through patience written into our lungs, into our stride? Or are we merely grasping at absence, projecting endurance where only chance and accident truly reigned? Maybe we will never know. Yet the silence left by giants remains, palpable across tundras that no longer hold their shadow. And it is in this silence that we follow our own reflection further, in search of where these two lives, mammoth and human, rested close at night, within the stone halls of caves, where survival itself was drawn upon walls in ochre and dream. The long chase dissolves into silence, and silence, in turn, draws us inward, away from the freezing winds, away from the exposed plains. Early humans sought places where stone enclosed them. Caves became more than mere shelter. They became sanctuaries, thresholds between survival and story. Within their dark chambers, memory lingered longer than in footprints or broken tools. And within those shadows, mammoths lived on, not only as prey, but as something greater, beings of awe, of presence, perhaps even of reverence. Step into such a cave in your imagination. The air cool, still, weighted with centuries of sleep. The mouth opens wide at the surface, but deeper inside the walls lean in, swallowing light. Flickers of torch or fire reveal ochre lines. Red, black, sometimes yellow, curving across surfaces worn smooth by time. The forms are unmistakable. The high shoulders of a mammoth, the sweeping arcs of tusks, the broad flanks etched again and again into stone. These are not hasty sketches of a meal. They are repetitions, layered over generations, drawn carefully, as if the very act of depiction carried power of its own. Archaeologists study the pigments, the techniques, the stone lamps that once shed their faint light. They analyze the minerals, iron for red, manganese for black, ground and mixed with fat or water to bind. But beyond science rests a deeper question. Why did our ancestors spend precious time, in an age of scarcity, to carve and paint giants upon walls where no mammoth would ever walk? Could it be that the cave was not only protection from the cold, but a cathedral of memory, where the hunt became ceremony, where survival blended seamlessly with meaning? The evidence suggests care. Many of the paintings lie deep inside, far beyond where daily life was lived. They are not casual marks left by bored hands, but intentional creations placed in secret halls where only a flicker of fire could reveal them. In these depths, the acoustics shift. Echoes bend strangely. Some researchers believe the place's chosen enhanced sound, as if story was not only seen but heard. Trumpet calls of mammoths imitated by human voice against the walls, resonating like dialogue between species separated, yet entwined. We do not know what early humans believed, but mammoths appear often beside other creatures on these walls, sometimes at the heart of composition, sometimes looming over smaller figures. They were sustenance, yes, but also presence. Perhaps their bulk embodied the scale of the endless ice age itself, forces too large to tame, too necessary to ignore. To paint them was to acknowledge this weight. To paint them was to carry their image back into the firelit intimacy of the group, where memory and survival were braided together. And there is something more. Some paintings show mammoths pierced with lines, perhaps spears, perhaps not. Others show mammoths without injury, whole and dignified. Could it be that the act of painting them as wounded was a form of sympathetic magic, a ritual rehearsal of the hunt before it even began? Or perhaps the untouched forms were gestures of respect, gratitude, even offerings of spirit to beings from whom life was taken but never dismissed lightly. What if, within these caves, the boundaries blurred? Hunt and myth, survival and ceremony, observation and imagination, none were divided as neatly as we divide them now. For early humans, to survive was already to be in conversation with the forces that sustained survival. Fire, stone, ice, mammoth, all were companions. All became symbols larger than their physical form. It is only in later ages that we shrink them into categories. Then, they were simply life itself, depicted on walls to carry them into memory when the plains fell silent. The caves themselves preserved more than art. Charcoal fragments remain in the soils, dating tools of illumination. Crude lamps carved from stone and filled with fat, their flames trembling against surfaces. Hands pressed against walls, outlined with blown pigment, suggest presence, a way of saying I was here. Between those prints and the painted mammoths, we see humans as both participant and witness, shaping continuity even in ages so fragile, so perilous that simply surviving another winter was uncertain. And still, mammoths dominated their imagery. They did not choose rabbits or small game to honor in pigment. They chose giants. We can imagine the hush of children looking at those forms by firelight, hearing them retold in story, the chase, the ambush, the inscrutable patience of giants. Through such memory, generations learned not only what the hunt required, but what existence meant. The cave was classroom, temple, archive, and dream all at once. Even now, standing within these caves today, the images unsettle us. They hold time suspended. The ochre giants are not fading quickly, shielded from wind and sun, lingering as if memory itself pressed into rock. The mammoths look back at us across tens of thousands of years, unchanged, while our own world has shifted beyond recognition. And it is difficult not to feel that these places were constructed, not accidentally but intentionally, as vessels for timelessness. So when we speak of mammoths as myth or symbol, we must remember myth and survival were not separate categories. To catch a mammoth was to feed the group, but it was also to weave story into walls of stone, to leave memory tangible in pigment, to anchor existence against the silence of death. The caves transformed the fleeting into permanence. In that transformation, survival blurred into art, and art into identity. The The firelight dims in our imagination again, the walls fading back into shadow, the ochre lines dissolving into dark. But as we return to the surface of Ice Age Earth, we find mammoth bones not within stone paintings, but within the marshes and wetlands where their great bodies sometimes fell. Death not in ceremony, but in chance of terrain. Our story slips now from cave to swamp, from myth to mud, to the traces left where giants could not rise again. Not all mammoths fell to spears. Some sank. Their remains, found in wetlands and marshes, tell a quieter story, where the land itself became hunter. The Ice Age was not only frozen plains and open lakes, but a patchwork of saturated ground, hidden sinkholes, wetlands that glossed smooth on the surface yet swallowed weight beneath. To step into such a place unknowing could turn a life of power into stillness within hours. Archaeologists uncover mammoth skeletons deep in peaty soils, sometimes whole, sometimes half-collapsed. The weight of muscle, bone, and tusk was too much for the earth's soft grip. With each struggling movement, the swamp took more, pulling giants lower, until even their trunks could not lift them out. These deaths were not hunts in the usual sense. They were chance, accident, or perhaps, as some evidence suggests, guided despair. Humans learning to use the land as ally, slipping giants into places they could not escape. We imagine such a scene. A herd moving cautiously across a meadow rimmed with reeds, drawn by the promise of water and grasses. Underfoot, the surface looks firm, but weight tells another truth. One step too deep and a leg sinks. A second step, another sinks further. The mammoth struggles, trumpets sounding across the emptiness, calves stirring nervously, adults circling. Panic builds, and nearby, hunters wait, not with spears raised in a rush, but watching as weight and patience do what no tool could safely manage. The silence of marshland carries a strangeness. It is not the still hush of snow, but a muted soundscape where reeds sigh, where ripples spread and vanish, where footsteps squelch instead of echo. To stage a hunt here was to blend into the silence of mud itself, letting the ground entrap the giant without conflict. Nature became accomplice, lending its softness as weapon, lending its silence as camouflage. And when the mammoth could no longer lift itself, weakened and exhausted, hunters only needed to wait. Bones recovered from such sites bear fewer marks than those from open plain hunts. Cut marks appear later in butchery, when the mammoth was already claimed by Earth. Sometimes whole skeletons remain, tusks still crossed above skulls, ribs bent inward but largely untouched. This speaks of bodies sunken in waterlogged silence, preserved where scavengers could not reach. Such deaths straddle a boundary between accident and strategy, leaving us uncertain which was more decisive, human cunning or chance of terrain. Wetlands have their own patience. Peat builds slowly, grain by grain, layer by layer, sealing past into future. Bodies that fall there sink not only in space but in time, preserved against decay by the water's comfortable suffocation. These places are strange archives, where mammoth flesh, hair, even fragments of hide linger far longer than they should, suspended in Earth's liquid memory. The bog becomes a library unknowingly, cataloging survival and death in layers of blackened soil. There is existential weight in imagining giants trapped in mud, their power suddenly irrelevant. The same legs that could cross valleys could not lift free from suction ground. The same tusks that scattered predators flailed helplessly against reeds. Strength collapses not in combat, but in slow surrender. For humans to stand watching this must have stirred both relief and unease. Relief that survival was easier, unease that survival meant witnessing giants undone not by skill, but by fragility revealed too suddenly. We might ask, how much of human advancement came not from triumph over giants, but from learning to notice weakness, to notice terrain itself as ally? Spears were needed, yes, fire was needed, yes, but perhaps the deeper strength lay in adaptation, the realization that earth and water could serve as silent partners in survival. Could it be that what set us apart was not our tools alone, but our ability to make enemies of obstacles and allies of landscapes? And yet, the marsh does not prefer predator to prey. In its patience, it takes whatever steps too far. Just as mammoths sank, so too may hunters have sunk on other occasions, drawn too close to the same deceptive softness. In its silence, the swamp remembers all equally, never recording bias, only collecting bones indiscriminately. Perhaps that is why so many whole remains lie in those soils. Nature writes its truths without care for story. The imagination lingers here, on the patience of wetlands, on the muffled trumpets of giants left struggling in reeds. Their echoes still seep through sediment, their bones still resting in dark reservoirs of peat. To walk across a bog today is to step lightly over layers of vanished lives, a thickened soil of memory thicker than stone, concealing both accident and intention. And from here, we must follow what becomes of those bodies when embraced not by marsh but by use. When flesh is gone but bone remains, carved, reshaped, transformed into gift. For a mammoth taken gave more than food. It gave shelter, tools, and symbols. To fall was not only to die, but to become part of human life in new and enduring forms. The death of a mammoth was never just an end, it was a beginning. A single giant offered abundance almost beyond comprehension, enough to sustain entire groups for weeks, perhaps months, if handled with care. But this gift was not taken lightly. To kill a mammoth meant to carry both gratitude and responsibility, for such an offering demanded reverence. In their enormity, mammoths embodied more than food. They became material for shelter, for tools, for memory itself. Nothing was left forgotten. Nothing was wasted. From their flesh came nourishment. Layers of fat, rich and dense, were rendered down into fuel, feeding fires through long cold nights. Meat was cut in great slabs, dried or frozen, portions buried within permafrost soil to preserve them until winter demanded release. We imagine families gathered at the fire, children feeding on marrow rich from shattered bone, the crack and steam filling the night with sense of both survival and community. Eating was not just sustenance. It was ritual, a recognition that life passed into life, that the hunt's risk was answered by Earth's provision. Yet the mammoth was not only consumed, it was transformed. Bones, heavy and curved, became frames for shelters. Archaeologists have found circular arrangements of mammoth bones, layered with hides, forming dwellings solid enough to withstand glacial winds. In these huts, survival itself took form from what once walked the valleys. To live inside the structure was to live inside the gift of the kill, protected by what had once been resistant, towering, alive. Perhaps this was part of reverence. The mammoth's strength carried on, guarding even in death. Tusks told another story. Ivory, durable yet workable, became a canvas for human ingenuity. From tusks, tools were carved, smooth awls, points, handles. But more than this, designs and patterns etched the surfaces, spirals, lines, figures that spoke in symbols we can no longer fully read. The utilitarian blurred into the ceremonial. Ivory was not just shaped, it was honored. Could it be that each carving was gratitude, a gesture of respect to the animal that had sustained them? Or perhaps talismans, to carry strength of giants into fragile human form? Hides stretched across frames made coverings, warmth against the cold. Strips became cord. Sinew became thread, binding parts of spears or sewing clothing. Even dung, often overlooked, could be dried into fuel when wood was scarce across the steppe. In every aspect, the mammoth extended life not once, but many times over, dispersing its abundance across days of shelter, warmth, and work. Each giant that fell gave not a single gift, but countless ones, cascading through the lives of all who survived by it. There is humility in such completeness. To use every part was not simply efficiency, but relationship. Hunters knew the risk, the power, the danger in confronting mammoths, and so the respect lingered in how they handled what remained. Modern perspectives often imagine hunting as conquest, but perhaps then it was felt differently, as exchange, as balance. Life taken, but life multiplied in return. A reciprocity silent but binding. Scientists who study these remains trace not only survival, but creativity. The huts of bone are among the oldest architecture known to us, precursors to later dwellings, showing design born directly from necessity. The carvings in ivory are among the earliest expressions of art, inseparable from survival yet transcending mere function. The mammoth was not only provider of calories, but of inspiration. It helped shape the very human capacity to build, to decorate, to create meaning out of material. And so we find ourselves reflecting. Was the mammoth remembered more as prey or as ancestor? Were these bones, these tusks, and these carvings memorials as much as they were tools? Could it be that in honoring every fragment, humans were writing the earliest chapters of gratitude, acknowledging the interdependence that shaped them? The reverence of not wasting, of transforming gift into continuity, suggests not just survival instincts but ethical instincts too. Perhaps necessity taught not only ingenuity but empathy, an early recognition that to endure, one must acknowledge what was lost. The abundance a mammoth provided was enough to change the rhythm of life. Where scarcity once meant constant movement, a single kill offered pause, time to make, to remember, to create. Firelight could burn longer, stories could unfurl, hands could carve instead of chase. Memory itself was shaped in these pauses, and within them, the giant lingered long after flesh was gone. The gift of the kill extended even into imagination, fueling myth across winters where survival alone would never have been enough. And so the mammoth became more than a creature fallen. It became shelter, warmth, nourishment, symbol, and story. Its strength continued long after its body collapsed into silence. Each rib that framed a hut, each tusk incised by human hand, each carving pressed into ivory. Together they affirmed that survival was never simple appetite. It was a thread of relationship, a weaving of lives human and non-human alike into a fabric of endurance. We leave the huts of bone behind now in our vision, their circles standing stark against snowy tundra, smoke rising from within. But even amidst gratitude, there must always have been solemnity, for the act of killing giants was not without weight. Blood lay on snow. The earth absorbed silence and grief as well as abundance. And under the long pale sky, the gift was shadowed by memory of cost. For in every feast there lingers an echo, quiet and haunting, the memory of blood beneath the ice moon, waiting in the chapters still to come. Hunts were never ordinary. They were not daily rhythms, but rare moments that shaped seasons, families, perhaps even destinies. Each decision to face a mammoth meant weighing the cost, risking injury, risking failure, risking the collapse of the fragile balance that survival always walked upon. And so when giants did fall, the moment echoed larger than itself. Beneath the pale moons of the Ice Age, when snow stretched endless and shadows lengthened without trees, blood spilled into whiteness carried both victory and grief. Picture for a moment the scene. The herd has scattered, the torches dim, the shouting ceased. A mammoth lies still, its massive shape dark against the sheen of snow. Around it, hunters gather in silence, the steaming breath of men and beast rising together into the same frozen air. The moon looks down, cold and indifferent, but to those who stood there, the light must have felt unbearable in its exposure. The whole landscape stark with contrast, red across white, life upon silence. Scientists who study these remains find confirmation in patterns. Tool marks around ribs, fractures in vertebrae, points broken and embedded in long bones. These are forensic details, evidence of kill and butchery. Yet beyond them lies something science cannot measure: the emotional weight of the act itself. These were not easy victories, not casual events. To kill a mammoth was to alter the course of many lives. It fed camps, sustained fires, but it also demanded reflection. Victories this large could never feel simple. Consider how rarely they must have happened. Smaller prey filled in the gaps: reindeer, bison, wild horse. But the mammoth was different, too dangerous to attempt often, too majestic to risk without plan. And so each fall of a giant may have etched itself into memory as a kind of ceremony. Perhaps stories stretched from these hunts for years after, across firesides, across generations. Children who had not yet walked the tundra would sit beneath carved ivory tusks and hear of the night blood froze red beneath the moon. In this way, every kill carved history into the mind, even as stone carved marks into the body. And what of the grief? It is difficult to imagine such beings falling without stirring unease. Mammoths moved in herds like families, protective, loyal, maternal in their leadership. To watch one collapse would be to witness not only life ending, but bonds breaking, calves left bewildered, elders trumpeting in sorrow. There is no proof, only possibility, but perhaps humans felt a resonance in that grief, sensing in it echoes of their own. To strike down giants was to survive, but also to acknowledge the world is never won without cost. The Ice Age moon must have made such realities sharper still. The cold light carried no warmth, only exposure. Blood darkened quickly against frost. Shadows stood stark. Silence swelled around the aftermath, as if the earth itself paused to absorb the weight of the event. For the hunters, perhaps, there was triumph. Bellies would be full. Fires would burn longer. But with triumph came solemnity, the quiet knowledge that life had been taken in ways no one could reverse. Irreversible moments lingered heavier in that long, cold world, where nothing was disposable, nothing forgotten. We tend to think of history as written in words, but for early humans, memory was carved into sensory experience. The smell of iron in the air, the feel of cold against sweat, the image of blood under starlight, tusks rising ghost-like into the night sky. These were their symbols, repeating each time a mammoth fell, shaping how they remembered the boundary between themselves and the giants who shared their world. The story of a kill was not only the telling of bravery or skill, but also a meditation on fragility, on the razor edge between survival and death. When archaeologists uncover sites marked by clusters of bones, they also find traces of fire, shards of tools, scattered ornaments of ivory. These are more than refuse. They are echoes of gathering, of community formed tightly around both gain and loss. A fallen mammoth unified a group, binding hunger and gratitude into shared experience. Around this center, story grew. Myth deepened. Memory anchored itself more firmly than footprints in snow. Perhaps this is why some of the oldest caves, sealed with ochre paintings, returned to the image of mammoths again and again. The kill was not a single act, but a cycle of story. In the flicker of fire, the painted mammoth became both prey and ancestor, both enemy and teacher. What began as survival carried forward as meaning. The awe at their size, the solemnity at their fall, the reverence in using them fully, these became the threads of cultural memory. And so, beneath the ice moon, beneath the pale light of a sky that offered no comfort, humans stood beside giants and felt the paradox of survival. Blood was both promise and lament. Snow was both canvas and witness. The moon was both light and indifference. Every kill became something larger than itself, pressing its weight not only into soil but into minds, into generations who remembered long past the disappearance of herds. The moonlight fades in this vision now. The snow reflects only silence, the body already being carved, the air cooling around it. But with this moment comes a question even heavier than ivory, even deeper than marrow. If giants could be ended, if patience and strategy could undo what once seemed eternal, then what else could vanish? And so, in the memory of blood beneath the ice moon, we sense another echo, extinction itself, foreshadowed in every hunt, waiting to unfold across epochs. Extinction is never a single moment. It is not the fall of one animal, nor even the loss of one herd. It is drawn out across centuries, stretched like breath, so gradual that those living through it may not have seen the ending until the silence had grown too deep to be ignored. Mammoths vanished, but the questions remained. Did human spears carve their decline? Did fire, traps, and long endurance chases tighten the circle? Or was it the turning of the climate, glaciers retreating, grasslands shrinking, warmth reshaping the very stage that once carried their herds? The truth lingers, fragmented, uncertain. A series of whispers carried not by witnesses, but by fossils, isotopes, and traces left behind in Earth's memory. Scientists seek answers in bones, in tusks, in frozen carcasses. Oxygen isotopes reveal warming cycles, shifts in rainfall, stresses woven into ivory growth rings like tree records of time. In some years, the lines are tight signs of scarcity. In others, they widen a brief abundance. But toward the end, The signals tilt toward chaos, environments fragmenting, seasons less predictable. A species built for ice found itself faced with marsh, with forest, with landscapes shrinking beneath its feet. Grasslands, so vital, so wide, faded into patches too narrow to sustain massive herds. The ground upon which giants relied betrayed them, changing faster than bodies could adapt. And yet, climate alone may not explain it. For even in difficult times, mammoths endured before. They had survived countless ice advances and retreats, countless cycles of warming and cooling etched into glacial rhythms. If they had endured then, why not again? Here the questions deepen, circling back to ourselves. Perhaps it was the pressure of human presence added to climate's weight that tipped the balance. Spear marks scored bones, evidence of kill upon kill. Sites of butchery multiply toward the end of their timeline. What if the entropy of climate was survivable until we appeared? Could it be that extinction was not one cause, but the meeting of two forces, the shifting planet below and the restless ingenuity of humans above? There is humility in this uncertainty. We want clear stories, precise answers, but the Earth rarely offers them. Fossils do not speak in absolutes. They speak in fragments, bits carried away by rivers, scattered by scavengers, fragmented by thaw. They tease us with possibility, but remind us that survival, and its opposite, is rarely simple, never neat. Extinction is layered. Chance, pressure, imbalance, and time interwoven. Perhaps what the mammoths endured or failed to endure is precisely what every species faces, the unpredictability of change. And yet, their absence carries a resonance larger than fact. The silence left by their vanishing spans across us even now. To imagine them here, shadows against snowy fields, is to feel the gap their loss created. Extinction leaves not only ecological disruption, but emotional absence, a hollowed shape in landscape and memory where something vast once was. Perhaps this is why they linger in our dreams more profoundly than many other vanished beings. It is not only that they are gone, but that their going feels unfinished, too near, too luminous in its echoes. Still, extinction is also a mirror. Reading their fossils, studying their timelines, we see ourselves reflected back. When climates shift now, when grasslands shrink, when ice melts with alarming speed, we recognize the same fragilities, the same uncertainties. If giants could fall, what makes us think endurance will always be ours? Our tools are different, our reach greater, but extinction whispers the same lesson across species. Survival is never guaranteed. Life is always conditional. In far northern islands, late survivors lingered. Small populations of mammoths endured in isolation, their bodies gradually shrinking, adapting to limited resources. For thousands of years after they vanished from larger continents, a few still scraped at tundra soil, their herds small shadows of memory. Imagine the loneliness of those last ones, moving across coasts where silence grew thick around them. Did they remember the thunder of multitudes? Did they sense in their isolation what was vanishing? We will never know, but the thought alone unsettles, reminding us that extinction is not only sudden absence, but slow unraveling of connection. Some scientists speculate about our responsibility, placing weight of blame upon the hunters. Others argue we were merely one thread in a fabric already fraying from climate's pressure. In truth, the debate may never close, and perhaps it should not, for within that uncertainty rests a necessary humility. Survival is complex, extinction even more so. To reduce it to numbers, to single causes, is to forget how vast and interwoven life's story is. The mammoth's end, like its life, was a chord played across both earth and human hands. What is certain is that their extinction did not silence their presence. They linger through bones, through frozen flesh pulled from permafrost, through carvings on ivory, through ochre images in caves. They linger in imagination, large enough that we still dream of reviving them, still tell stories of their thundering steps. The echo of their absence carries on, as if extinction itself reverberates like sound, fading but never fully gone. And perhaps that echo is the most important gift they leave us. For when we lean close to extinction's whisper, what we hear is not only a story about mammoths, but about ourselves. A reminder that nothing, no matter how vast, how strong, how many, lasts forever untouched. That survival demands not conquest but awareness. That change, sudden or slow, is the only constant written into the Earth's patient archive. As we move forward through this long tale, we leave the silence of extinction's questions behind, but not its echoes. For in the frozen bodies left behind, sealed in ice and soil, the giants still speak. Their flesh, their hair, their very last meals linger still, preserved enough for us to meet them almost face to face. And so, from echoes of disappearing, we drift next into presence preserved, the frozen carcasses that became teachers across millennia. Extinction whispered absence, but the Earth, in its patience, did not let the mammoth slip away completely. The cold kept hold. In certain corners of the north, where temperatures dropped low enough to still even the smallest motion of decay, mammoths remained. Entire bodies, sealed within permafrost, waiting as though time itself had been interrupted. And when they emerge, slowly thawing from melting ground or uncovered abruptly by shifting rivers, they come to us less like fossils than like beings paused mid-breath. Permafrost is not silence alone. It is an archive. Within its deep frozen layers are dusts of volcanic eruptions, trapped air bubbles holding the atmosphere of long-vanished climates, fragments of pollen drifting unseen for tens of thousands of years. In this cold library, mammoths lay preserved alongside the record of their world. Hair still clings to their bodies, skin still folds around their frames. Even the plants caught in their mouths, their very last meals, still survive, fragile, unmistakably real, almost edible. Everything about them feels like memory refusing erasure. To look upon such a creature thawed from ice is to blur time itself. The curve of tusks, the long coarse hairs, the massive bulk, all as though the ghost of the Pleistocene had wandered directly into our present. Scientists study them carefully, not as relics to be marveled at, but as teachers. Their stomach contents reveal diet: grasses, sedges, herbs of tundra plains that no longer spread across Eurasia. The isotopes in their tissues carry stories of migration, of climates endured, of stresses faced in the last winters of their kind. Even parasites still nestling in preserved flesh testify to their daily lives, to illnesses long extinct. It is haunting to imagine death arriving so quickly that even the contents of a stomach remain intact. Many of these frozen carcasses show signs of sudden end: collapse into mud, suffocation in snow, entrapment in ice. Not long, drawn-out decay, but quick silence, sealed by cold before the usual scavengers could arrive. As if life turned to history in a single pause, caught just as the page was being written. What lessons, then, do they leave us in their stillness? Perhaps that death, though absolute, does not erase completely. Under certain conditions, time folds and presence lingers. And yet these frozen teachers are not only biology. They are philosophy too. To stand before the remains of a mammoth, its amber eye still glistening in ice as if awake, is to feel disarmed. We live in worlds of movement and change, expecting time to scatter memory relentlessly. But here before us is an exception, a reminder that Earth can slip outside ordinary rules, that decay can be paused, that memory can survive not just in story, but in body. What does such preservation mean for us? That our sciences can dissect it, measure it, compare it, but also that our imaginations cannot help but dwell in wonder. Some now speak of resurrection, of extracting DNA from marrow and hair, of piecing genome fragments together, of placing them into elephant surrogates to call the mammoth back into present life. The idea shimmers somewhere between science and longing to reverse loss, to undo the silence extinction leaves behind. But what if these frozen bodies are not invitations to resurrection, but reminders instead of fragility? Their endurance is less about lasting forever, and more about reminding us that even giants can be paused mid-step, that time is not always a clean erasure. The frozen mammoths we uncover are more than ancient biology. They are messages. Messages written in ice about climate's power, about sudden death, about survival suspended. A child's step near the thawing body sees not only a pile of bones but a creature that almost seems alive, recognizable, familiar in form yet unreachable in life. That gap, the closeness and impossibility, awakens something deeper. It reminds us that the line between past and present is thinner than we think, held together by chance, by preservation, by the cold patience of Earth itself. And if memory can be held so tangibly in tissue, we must ask, how much else lies waiting in frozen ground? Not only mammoths, but forests preserved in ice, insects still complete, seeds viable after tens of thousands of years. The past is never fully gone. It lingers quietly, dormant, until change exposes it again. Just as mammoths resurface with each summer melt, so too do we realize that extinction is absence with fragments left behind, still teaching, still speaking if we lean close enough to hear. We leave the carcass now, tucked again in permafrost in our imagination, hair still motionless under frozen winds. But as the earth warms, more of these silent teachers emerge, offering us lessons not only in what once lived, but in what climate can reveal, disrupt, or erase. And so from preserved flesh, we step toward something broader. The cycles of climate themselves, the rhythm of ice and thaw that shaped mammoth and human alike, and still shapes us now. The frozen carcasses remind us of something larger, that mammoths, like humans, did not walk alone in time. They were carried by the breathing rhythm of the earth itself, a rhythm slow enough to be measured not in days or even centuries, but in cycles spanning tens of thousands of years. Warmth advanced, then withdrew. Glaciers grew, then receded. Ice and melt, freeze and thaw, drawing shorelines in and erasing them again. And within these vast arcs, both mammoth herds and human hunters lived as guests, never in control, only adapting to whatever mood the planet chose to hold. Ice cores pulled from Greenland and Antarctica reveal these rhythms with startling clarity. Deep cylinders of frozen time, miles long, carry bubbles of air untouched for thousands of years. Within them, we measure carbon dioxide, methane, particles of volcanic ash. The story they tell is not static. It is pulse. A slow inhale of ice advance, a slow exhale of retreat, and through each breath, climates shifted, reshaping life. Pollen grains carried within ancient soils echo the same cycles. Forests pulling back when cold advanced, grasses stretching wide when warmth gave space. Each record is fragmentary, yet together they form a chorus. Earth remembers its own changes. For mammoths, these shifts dictated every decision. Herds followed grasses, migrating along corridors left open by retreating glaciers, turning north when cold allowed, south when warming threatened to thin their range. These migrations, recorded subtly in isotopes of their ivory, tell us that they moved not erratically but in rhythm with the climate. Humans, too, followed. Camps rose along these same corridors. Footprints gathered near the same thawing rivers, the same exposed valleys. Mammoth and human were not adversaries alone. They were companions in climate's grand theater, both cast into positions neither chose. We may be tempted to think of humans as decisive, as shapers of our own fate. Yet in these cycles we too were carried. The thickness of ice determined our routes. The length of winters determined our hunger. A single cold shift in climate could scatter families, just as a warming cycle could close the open plains where herds once grazed. Our presence lingers in stone tools, but the greater presence belongs to Earth, pacing itself through shifts of tilt and orbit, movements so silent we scarcely perceive them even now. There is humility in this thought. Survival is often remembered as strategy, innovation, or conquest, but beneath those layers lies the truth of dependence. We have always been shaped more than we have shaped. Mammoths, for all their size, were subject to the same. Their vast forms, amplified by thick coats and heavy stores of fat, were adaptations written into their bodies by long winters, by generations of cold, demanding resilience. We, smaller and fragile, adapted differently, with fire, with story, with tools, but the source of change was the same. The glacier breathed forward, and both species bent its way. And yet, as we reflect, a gentle unease gathers. For those ice cores do not stop their story in the past. Their records stretch into our own time, reminding us that the rhythms continue, whether or not we choose to listen. Warmth comes again, faster now, accelerated. The ice shrinks quickly, seas rise quickly, cycles bend in ways less natural, more human-driven. We see ourselves again in the shadow of mammoths, not mirrored in form, but mirrored in vulnerability. They fell when climates shifted too far, when grasslands too quickly receded. Could we too be guests still, only imagining we are in control? To live under the breath of climate is to walk with uncertainty. Both mammoth and human endured it, sometimes surviving, sometimes not. Their traces remain in isotopes, in frozen reeds, in scattered bones. Our traces will remain too, in technofossils, plastics, altered air. Both become memory, carried forward by the same earth that held ice for tens of millennia. Perhaps this is what the frozen cycles ask of us, that we remember our place not as masters, but as part of a rhythm larger than history. To read ice is to read humility, to see how giants fell not only to spears, not only to scarcity, but to climate itself shifting hand beneath them. The mammoth walked patiently under such cycles. So did we. The question lingering now is whether we still walk with that same patience, or whether we have forgotten the breathing of the planet entirely. And from these questions, from this cosmic rhythm, we drift not into data, but into myth. For if science tells us they vanished in climate's breath, story tells us they survive still, in symbol, in spirit, in imagination. The mammoth as myth becomes our next remembrance, carrying us deeper into echoes long after their herds were gone. Long after the last herds slipped from the tundra, mammoths continued to walk in human minds. Though their bodies thinned into bones, their images lingered, painted on cave walls, carved into ivory, whispered into stories across generations. They became more than prey, more than beast. They became symbols that straddled two worlds, one of material survival and one of myth. Mammoths were not simply gone. They were carried forward, half real, half spirit, shaping imagination itself. To early humans, memory was survival, and imagination was navigation. Stories leaned against firelight the way bodies leaned against warmth, and within those stories, mammoths appeared often. In legends, their bodies were too grand to bury, too immense to comprehend, so they became beings of the underworld, creatures who lived beneath the earth until storms lifted them to the surface again. Some cultures believed their bones rising from riverbanks were remnants of underground life. Others imagined them as spirits still roaming unseen, giants hidden like constellations behind the veil of time. In these myths, extinction was never final. The mammoth continued, parceled into belief as much as into bone. Archaeological traces show us their role in practical life. Huts framed by skeletal remains, carvings etched into ivory, even figurines tiny but deliberate, shaped so that giants could be held in the hand. Yet these objects mean more than survival, they mean reverence. To carve a mammoth into ivory harvested from its own body was to circle flesh into symbol, to hold the essence of giant not just in memory but in matter transformed. Could it be that, in doing this, humans were crafting not only tools of ritual but the very foundations of myth-making itself? Even today, their image feels unfinished. Unlike other extinct creatures, long dissolved into the anonymity of deep prehistory, mammoths occupy a space uncomfortably near. We know them too well, closer than dinosaurs, familiar in form through their elephant kin, present still in frozen carcasses reappearing from ice. To look at them is to feel history unresolved, as though their absence is temporary, as though they might step forward again if we wait long enough. Their extinction is recent enough to grieve, their memory vivid enough to hunger for return. Science reflects this proximity. Efforts to resurrect mammoths through fragments of DNA blur the line between myth and laboratory, revival becoming a modern quest, a continuation of the human need for them not to be finished. Do we pursue this science out of curiosity, or out of a mythic desire not to lose what we cannot bear to see ended? When we imagine mammoths returning to tundras, it feels less an experiment than a legend fulfilled, an old story completed. But perhaps our yearning is itself myth, a refusal to allow absence its silence. The mammoth's role in memory also mirrors our own desire to see ourselves enlarged across time. Giants are always more than themselves. They are reflections of something vast we hope to carry. In their size, humans confronted scale. The immensity of landscapes, the immensity of climate forces, the immensity of both danger and provision. To place giants into story was to engage scale through imagination, to create symbols where the ordinary could not suffice. Their presence in myth was never only about them. It was about us seeing ourselves in relation to immensity. Old legends echo this still. In Asia, mammoth bones uncovered were sometimes thought to be the remains of dragons. In Europe, they became the bones of giant men who walked before recorded time. In Siberia, their tusks were said to belong to subterranean creatures who tunneled beneath the frozen ground. Myths emerge wherever uncertainty lingers, and mammoths, preserved in fragments but never whole, became ideal beings for legend. They were too incomprehensible to be explained away, yet too vivid to be forgotten. And this may be why their absence still feels undone. We often encounter extinction as a line drawn, a cut-off, a disappearance too absolute. But mammoths defy that. Their flesh, hair, and tusks remain. Their stories wove across caves and cultures. Their memory walks more firmly than most who vanished far longer ago. They feel unfinished not because of science, but because of presence, because they taught us, fed us, lived beside us, and linger still in every excavation, every thaw. Perhaps myth is precisely what fills unfinished stories. It creates resonance where silence alone would feel incomplete. Myths hold what bones cannot. The awe, the grief, the longing. They preserve what data cannot: emotion, scale, reverence. And so mammoths remain, teaching us not only about endurance through cold, but about endurance through story. In paintings, in carvings, in whispered imagination, they found afterlife not in biology, but in meaning. And so, when we dream of them still walking across frost, we are not inventing, we are continuing. Continuing the same impulse that painted ochre inside caves, that carved arcs into ivory. When we picture mammoths under full moons, their shadows trembling across snow, we participate in humanity's oldest act, holding giants within us so that their absence does not fully erase them. But if myth carries mammoths forward, another thought lingers in the shadow. What happens when myth meets modern science? When frozen carcasses give us DNA? When laboratories begin to echo caves? When imagination takes the form of experiments? Do we risk reanimating what was meant to rest? Or are we compelled by that same unfinished feeling, that refusal to let the story end? For now, they live between us, both vanished and present, both silent and whispering, both lost and waiting. Their story is unfinished because memory insists on retelling. Their myth endures because absence alone was never enough. And so, from myth, we turn toward the horizon of resurrection, not only in imagination, but in the speculative science that seeks to call back the echo itself. The mammoth never left us fully. It lingered in bones, in frozen flesh, in memory, and in myth. And now, in our own time, it lingers again in a new form, within strands of ancient DNA, incomplete but legible, fragile yet still carrying information across thousands of years. Today, scientists look upon these fragments and dream of revival. What if mammoths could walk again? What if extinction, so heavy a word, might not be final? With the tools of genetics, we imagine bringing shadows into form, giants back into cold light. Yet beneath this ambition rests another question. Are these efforts truly about mammoths, or are they about us? Our hunger to reverse erasure, our refusal to let go of what should have passed into silence. The science is astonishing. From frozen carcasses, cells are harvested. Nuclei yield fragments of genetic code, a quilt of sequences stitched by time but not obliterated. The genome is incomplete, but scientists compare it to that of elephants, their closest living kin, filling the gaps like restorers patching the scroll of a ruined manuscript. Programs piece together fragments, threads aligning until the outline of a species emerges again. Not perfectly mammoth, but mammoth-like, an echo with fidelity good enough to imagine flesh. These sequences are then proposed to be placed within elephant cells, the embryos grown within surrogates. the hope being that one day a calf carrying the long hair of giants might step once again into snowy grasses. It sounds daring, miraculous, but it also sounds unsettled, as though myth and laboratory collide. Would these creatures be mammoths or hybrids, elephant bodies carrying genes tuned for another age? Would their presence be resurrection or invention? We call them de-extinction. But is extinction not also finality? If species are shaped not only by DNA but by landscape, memory, relationships, behaviors carried through generations, what then is revived when only code remains and not culture or time? The mammoth was not only biology, it was also Ice Age, and that Ice Age is gone. What, then, are these experiments revealing about us? Perhaps they reveal our unease with silence, our unraveling against endings. For as a species we invent not only tools but continuations. We write stories to keep what is lost. We build technologies to freeze, to store, to replicate. To consider extinction absolute is almost beyond us, so we dream of undoing it. Mammoth revival is less about them and more about our own restless heart, our unwillingness to accept that giants have fallen and will not rise. And yet, there's generosity hidden within this yearning too. Climate is warming now, permafrost retreating, ecosystems shifting quickly. In Siberia, some suggest mammoths return. Herds trampling permafrost, grazing shrubs into grass again. Might help preserve the tundra, slowing thaw, holding carbon in earth. In this way, the mammoth becomes not only myth returned, but tool of restoration, partner in repairing what unraveling threatens to consume. We imagine their weight pressing into snow, making it denser, colder, anchored. Once again, giants become saviors, this time summoned not from plains but from our laboratories. Still, another unease stirs. The bodies we design, the genomes we shape, are these mammoths or technofossils, artifacts of our age rather than theirs? Just as plastics and concrete will one day mark the strata of Anthropocene Earth, so too might re-engineered creatures stand as monuments to our interference. DNA edited, spliced, shifted, blending epochs and identities not meant to touch. The mammoth, if returned, would not be a true survivor of ice, but a reflection of human desire made animal. A shadow of our myth breathing in tundra air. And perhaps that is what disturbs us most. The revival is no longer about the past, but about our identity now. In striving to bring them back, we are not resurrecting history but reshaping it for ourselves. Do we do so out of respect, out of penance for what was lost? Or do we do so out of hunger, for spectacle, for mastery, for proof that even extinction is not beyond our hands? In cloning, in editing, in the dream of return, we reveal both our reverence and our arrogance, our tenderness and our refusal to surrender to entropy. There is beauty, though, in imagining it. A calf stepping into snow, herd shadows growing across tundra valleys once more. The sound of trumpeting carried into cold air after generations of silence. Even as science debates, the imagination seizes it, folds it into the same story we have carried since caves. Humans beside giants, survival and myth entwined. The difference is that now, the fire we hold is not flame in hand, but the fire of technology, shaping DNA instead of stone, story written not in ochre but in glowing screens. But the question still lingers, as softly as ice sighing under its thaw. Should we bring them back, or should memory be enough? Could it be that their greater role now is as teachers in absence, reminding us of fragility, of climate's breath, of how even giants fall? Perhaps true reverence would mean letting them remain in silence, carrying their myth as echo rather than shadow made flesh. Or perhaps reverence is action itself, a refusal to let their echo fade, even if what we create is only approximation. In the end, the science of revival and the myth of mammoths converge in the same human impulse. They live within us because absence feels intolerable. They linger as mirror because we see ourselves, fearing extinction's whisper in our own story. Whatever arises, calf, shadow, technofossil, or only memory, mammoths will not vanish. Not because the planet preserved them, but because we cannot stop carrying them. And yet, if giants can be imagined back into life, if even extinction itself becomes pliable in our hands, we must ask, what does the earth remember of them, beyond us? For one day, When human hands are no longer here, the planet itself will still hold its memory, in strata, in sediments, in isotopes written beneath our feet. From revival, we drift then toward planetary memory itself, where all species, all stories, rest in Earth's deep archive. The mammoth story does not end in bone or in frozen flesh, nor in ivory carved by the human hand. It endures in something wider, something that holds all lives, whether giant or minute. It endures in planetary memory. The Earth itself, through its patient layers, has kept record far longer than any of us could recall. Sediments, isotopes, and fossils are its language, the slow writing of landscapes, the careful archiving of each passing age. Mammoths reside not only in museums. They exist in soils, in permafrost, in trace elements carried deep within cores of ice and stone. Their story is written into the very fabric of the planet, waiting for us to lean close enough to read. Sediments carry the whispers first. Each flood deposits fragments. Each river lays down grains of sand, pollen, fragments of grass. Trapped within them, the mammoth's world lingers. Pollen reveals tundra plants, the grasses that fed herds across vast steppes. Charcoal flecks recall ancient fires, both natural and human. Even the tiny shells of algae caught in lake beds encode the chemistry of waters mammoths once drank from. Layer after layer, these deposits sketch the outlines of an environment, landscapes that rise again in fragments when studied, quiet reconstructions of vanished valleys. Isotopes tell another side of the memory. Locked within tusks, oxygen ratios reveal climate shifts, rainfall patterns, the presence or absence of meltwater rivers. Carbon, nitrogen, and strontium trace the forage of the herds, the long migrations between regions. Like signatures repeating across layers of ivory, they tell us where mammoths walked, when they endured scarcity, when they thrived. They do not speak in words or images, but in numbers, in ratios, mathematics of memory inscribed into chemistry. If bones are the scrolls of survival, isotopes are its hidden ink. Even fossils, incomplete as they are, tell more than life itself. They reveal how dust gathered in lungs, how joints wore down in cold, how teeth eroded against endless grasses. A single molar, 6 inches broad, preserves a record of thousands of chews, an intimate diary of one animal's final years. And multiplied across thousands of teeth, we begin to see species-wide patterns of change. Fossils are not only remains. They are voices, layered, different, but aligned by the chorus of deep time. When we speak of planetary memory, we enter a scale that humbles us. For the Earth remembers not in decades, but in epochs. Mass extinctions, sudden warming, tectonic shifts, glaciations, all are inscribed in stone. Mammoths are one presence among many in this archive, but they draw our attention because they dwell close enough that their echoes tilt into myth. They remind us how the Earth writes not only tragedy, but totality. Everything that touches its skin leaves some trace, however faint, however scattered. Perhaps this is why mammoths still feel so present. Their bodies linger in ice, their bones in museums, their isotopes in labs, their outlines in cave walls. But beyond all of this, their essence is woven into the layers of the Earth. We stand on ground that was shaped by their migrations, enriched by their grazing, pressed by their weight. Their legacy is not only downward as fossil record, but outward into soil composition, into plant dispersal, into the balance of ecologies that followed. Even in absence, planetary memory carries them like sediment carries dust. Philosophically, there is comfort in this, for if the Earth never forgets completely, even giants are never erased. They transform into new kinds of presence, loosened from flesh but fixed in pattern, preserved in material shifts beyond our perception. Could it be that nothing is ever wholly lost? They tell us extinction is final, but perhaps finality is softer than we think. Perhaps every being, once fallen, is folded into the archive of the planet, repurposed into the long continuity of Earth's memory. When we touch soil, we touch remnants. When we breathe, we inhale molecules once exhaled by lungs long vanished. When we study isotopes, we are not only reading the mammoth. We are reading the Earth reading itself, an unbroken cycle of observation, storage, and transmission. Memory does not belong only to us. It is planetary. It is sedimentary. It is eternal in its transformations. And so, mammoths live not by resurrection in flesh, but by persistence in archive. They reside in the Earth's memory as surely as in ours. To look beneath our feet is to know this. The planet remembers everything, not in words, but in matter, in dust, in stone. We leave them resting now, in layers hidden in tundra, in quiet rings of ivory, in the chemistry of stone. But still the question lingers. If the Earth preserves so much of the past, what lessons from the mammoth remain for us? And perhaps the truest one is not about giants themselves, but about us, our ability to survive only by learning from what has walked before. From planetary memory, we move back toward human story. The lesson of cooperation, what it meant to endure together, and how survival itself was written in unity. If Earth remembers everything in its layers, then what it remembers about us most clearly through the story of the mammoth is not only how we hunted, but how we hunted together. For the mammoth hunt was never the act of one arm or one spear. A single hunter, no matter how skilled, stood no chance against a giant weighing several tons. The woolly mammoth demanded cooperation. It demanded unity, timing, and trust. That necessity may have been one of our greatest teachers, not about violence, but about togetherness. Imagine a group gathering in the pale dawn, frost rising from breath, fire reduced to soft embers. Stone tips are checked, spears tightened, strategies whispered. Eyes meet in silence, understanding passing without words. Some will drive the herd toward the marsh, others will advance with torches, others will wait poised at flanks. Each relies entirely on others. A single movement wrong could scatter the herd, ruin the kill, or worse, bring death to the hunter instead. It was a lesson in interdependence. Survival meant trust. Archaeological traces reveal this unity indirectly. Sites show clusters of tools shattered at the same place, multiple weapons concentrated on the same skeleton. Bones carry scars from several strikes, directions converging from different angles. Evidence implies strategy, not accident. It shows that people moved as one, anticipated each other's actions, carried a mutual rhythm that mirrored, in its strange way, the rhythm of the mammoth herd itself. These lessons cannot be overstated. Cooperation shaped us as profoundly as fire or stone. Planning and ambush taught foresight. Encircling giants taught communication, whether in gestures, signals, or quiet vocalizations carried on wind. Sharing the yield of meat taught social balance. Each step into cooperation left traces not only in the hunt, but in how we began to live together. Could it be that our social bonds, language, story, community, were strengthened most in these very moments with mammoths at the center? Perhaps in them we found not just food, but the blueprint of society. Unlike predators of solitary design, humans thrived through shared effort. Other hunters took strength from tooth or claw. We took strength from one another. The mammoth, in its immensity, may have made this necessity undeniable. For in facing giants, one either stood together or not at all. And standing together, humanity discovered resilience beyond the reach of individuals. The mammoth taught us indirectly that survival is less about victory and more about belonging. Anthropologists see this lesson ripple outward. Cooperation was not confined to the hunt, but extended into daily survival. Sharing shelter, tending fire, caring for children communally. The unity required to confront giants seeded habits that shaped villages, kinship, roles. Perhaps we first discovered our depth as a collective species because the mammoth left us no alternative. Its size forced us into union, and in that union we discovered who we were. And maybe it is here that a deeper truth surfaces. Cooperation is not only a survival tactic, but an antidote to fear. Against a creature too vast to imagine defeating alone, togetherness carries calm. The load is distributed between many. Courage is multiplied. Fear is softened in company. These are lessons that go beyond Ice Age plains and into every moment of human story since, of crops planted, of rivers crossed, of cities raised. Each is a mammoth in its own way, insurmountable alone, possible together. Even now, we can feel the resonance. The giants are gone, but the need to cooperate remains. Climate shifts again, uncertainties rise again, crises loom again. The same truth returns. No one survives alone. Mammoths are no longer the test, but the planet itself is, and their ghost still whispers the lesson given on snowy plains, echoed in broken bones and shared fires. That survival is not domination. It is togetherness. And isn't it remarkable that bone, stone, and soil remember not only violence, but unity? That when we study mammoth hunts today, we glimpse the origins of community itself. Perhaps this is their greatest legacy. Not tusks or meat, but the awakening of our collective soul, the realization that cooperation carves endurance deeper than any spear could pierce. We leave the hunters here in imagination, standing side by side beneath a low sun, their breaths mingling, their eyes steady, preparing as one body for the chase ahead. The mammoth waits in valley shadows, unaware of the network arrayed against it. Neither species understands what we see now, that this moment is about more than death. It is about memory, unity, identity itself. And so we step from togetherness into fragility, turning the page to quieter remains, not communal hunts, but the slow disintegration of what is left behind. From unity in survival, the story carries us toward entropy, to bones pressed into dust, to silence overtaking memory, to time's long work against every creature and every triumph. Bones are patient things, but even patience has its limits. For thousands of years, mammoth bones lay under snow, under soil, under waterlogged ground. Some stayed whole, some fractured, some dissolved almost entirely. Entropy, slow and certain, crumbles them, molecule by molecule, until ivory arcs collapse into dust and ribs vanish into grains that cannot be distinguished from ordinary earth. And yet traces linger. The memory of bone stretches further than the body itself, resisting silence as though life inscribed marks too deep for easy erasure. We see it most clearly in fragments. A tooth, worn down by years of chewing steppe grasses, remains stable while the jaw decays away. A tusk, cracked and brittle, still holds inner layers where isotopes tell of past climates. Even as physical form collapses, information remains hidden within, waiting. Carbon lingering in lattice, nitrogen reflecting diet, strontium mapping seasonal migrations. Bone is not merely material, it is archive, echoing across time even when structure has failed. Permafrost preserved some whole, but most bones enter another rhythm. Erosion, dissolution, reintegration into the soil. Yet as they fade, they change the land itself. Calcium leaches into rivers, ivory powders into sediment, feeding cycles that outlive memory. In this way, even the collapse of form writes continuity, folding once living giants back into the quiet fabric of earth. Dust becomes soil. Soil becomes grass. Grass waits for other mouths. Entropy is never simple negation, it is transformation. Still, there is something haunting about the slow work of time grinding down even the colossal. Creatures once towering in bulk reduced to powder, indistinguishable from wind-blown dust. We might ask, what does it mean that memory disintegrates so gradually? That the story survives longest not in the visible shape of bone, but in invisible residues measured by science? Might memory itself be fighting entropy, scattering traces across forms less grand but equally persistent? Scientists lean close with their instruments, coaxing signals from fragile fragments. A sliver of rib yields isotopic history of shifting diets. A tooth root binds DNA enough to piece genomes together. Even crumbling dust of bone contains minerals that recall what the mammoth once consumed. It is as though each fragment, unwilling to fully surrender to silence, still whispers, I was here. I walked. I endured. Perhaps this is why bones, even broken, affect us. We do not see only dissolution, we see resistance. In their quiet decay, they mirror our own fear of being forgotten, our own desire for trace. For if the mammoth remains can survive in fragments, then maybe memory too can survive in pieces, scattered among those who choose to listen. And yet, entropy is patient still. However slowly, every remnant heads toward dust. Museums lift them from the ground, stabilize them, rehouse them under careful light. But the earth itself dissolves without such reverence. Fossils pressed into stone survive, yes, yet even those will fracture in deep future. Nothing holds forever. Even memory gives way. But perhaps this is the lesson the mammoth's bones gift us. That life does not resist entropy fully, it transforms within it. That to crumble is not to vanish. What seems lost is simply transmuted, written anew in chemistry, in landscapes, in sediments beneath future feet. Entropy is not enemy but partner in the Earth's long keeping. Without its cycle, there would be no archive, no isotopes to read, no fragments to teach. So as we imagine mammoth bones dissolving into soil, we do not hear only silence. We hear whispers of persistence, echoes that survive beyond shape. And from this slow transformation, we turn now into even quieter registers, into dust itself, into silence profound, where echoes stretch farther than material remains. Dust rises where mammoths once walked. Not dust of their bones alone, but the fine drift of time itself, the subtle settling of centuries upon landscapes that once pulsed with thunder. Plains that trembled beneath herds now lie quiet beneath grasses, beneath snow, beneath winds carrying only whispers. Where once the air shook with trumpets and the earth resounded with weight, all that remains now is silence. Vast, unbroken, yet curiously full. It is within dust and silence that mammoths linger for us today, fragile yet echoing, visible only to the patient imagination willing to lean into absence. Dust itself is a strange keeper. It is both erasure and reminder, both end and continuation. A giant reduced to powder feels like tragedy, yet that very powder does not disappear. It scatters, carried into rivers, pressed into soil, inhaled by wind. In some sense, mammoths remain not in the shape of life, but in its residue, woven invisibly into the very air that cycles endlessly through breath. To walk today across open tundra is to move amid particles of past lives, to carry silently in your lungs the faintest grains of giants faded into dust. Silence, too, is deceptive. We imagine it empty, but silence records. Every absence holds memory of what once filled it. The plains that are hushed now were once corridors resounding with migration, herds moving north and south as glacial breaths dictated. Their absence is an imprint, negative space against which we measure our own smaller echoes. When the wind sweeps across these plains, it does not fill emptiness. It reminds us, however subtly, of what left them. Silence is not void. Silence is the resonance of what is no longer there. Perhaps this is what stirs when we reflect upon mammoths. They are simultaneously gone and present, vanishing yet audible in echoes. Their dust is scattered widely but never destroyed. Their silence is strong but never mute. What we glimpse in their absence is memory itself. Not steady, not whole, but fragile, fading, endlessly becoming echo. The essence of mammoths lingers precisely because they are not here. Their absence opens space for longing, for imagination, for story to rise like dust lit in angled sunlight. Science, when it peers into this silence, finds evidence even in unseen traces. Aerosols of ancient soils reveal pollen once grazed by mammoths. Chemical signals in sediments confirm vanished ecologies. Dust is archived too, tiny but immense in what it carries. It lingers in ice cores, sealed in frozen bubbles for tens of thousands of years, telling us through fragments what whole herds once ate, where they moved, how climate pressed them closer to an edge. In every granule is a sliver of that vanished world, a reduction to its smallest unit but carrying record entire. Philosophically, dust and silence together are metaphors for human memory itself. We remember rarely in complete forms. We remember in fragments, in scattered particles, in impressions almost dissolved. Yet even in that incompleteness, an echo persists. The story survives not fully formed, but suggested, haunting, reaching us through absence more than presence. Could it be that this is why mammoths continue to affect us so deeply, that they exist for us not as whole creatures, but as the sum of what is lost? The unfinished, the scattered, the hushed are often what live longest in our imagination. The silence that followed their extinction was not immediate. For centuries, small herds lingered, isolated on islands, their remaining steps faint against the immensity of Earth. Gradually their echoes faded further until, finally, the last trumpeting call was heard by no human ear. Yet silence holds that, too. It holds the last sound, preserved not in vibration but in memory infused into soil, into air, into dust, continuing its slow cycle. Extinction never erases without leaving trace. Memory continues by scattering, by fragmenting, by transforming absence into resonance. And so we feel their echo in our own bodies now, in the way we long for them, imagine them, keep them close through art and science. Dust suspends itself unwillingly yet inevitably. Silence presses patiently yet persistently. They teach us something about survival that numbers and bones do not, that presence can endure beyond form, that lingering is sometimes stronger than permanence. A being gone may hold wider influence than a being still alive, simply because its absence turns every quiet moment into reminder. Under certain light, dust itself glows. What is scattered, broken down, rendered fine enough to seem inconsequential sparkles when illuminated. Perhaps the mammoth endures like this, broken into fragments, hushed in landscapes, but catching our awareness when light falls across memory. Silence becomes stage, dust becomes resonance. Together they remind us that the past is never completely lost, only waiting for new ways of being noticed. We leave the plains now in imagination, knees folding into grasses where mammoths once grazed, wind moving through silence vast enough to humble us. Dust drifts unseen, yet it carries more history than we know. Silence holds, yet in its holding we hear more than emptiness. We hear distance, resilience, the fragile persistence of what once thundered. And so dust and silence guide us forward, leading us deeper into reflection not only on mammoths, but on ourselves. If giants can dissolve this way, if echoes can be preserved only in traces, what of our own story? What fragments will remain when we too become dust? What silences will echo after us? Questions fold outward, looping our wonder endlessly, reminding us that the future of memory lives as much in what is absent as in what survives. Dust drifts where herds once gathered, silence stretches where their calls once rang, and yet, something remains within us that is more than memory. It is identity, shaped and reshaped by encounters with giants. To hunt mammoths was not only to survive, nor even only to feast. It was to learn who we were, to test the edges of our own being against something vastly larger, more powerful, more enduring than ourselves. In confronting the mammoth, humans confronted themselves, and in struggle, necessity, and awe, our very sense of identity was forged. The hunt was community embodied. No one could conquer a mammoth alone. Each kill was a shared act, a collective decision requiring courage and patience and cooperation. From it grew bonds, trust, and roles within the group. Hunters, gatherers, watchers, carvers. Every hand was needed. In that dependence lay something much deeper than survival. Identity ceased to be solitary. Life was woven together. One person's strength became another's endurance, another's foresight, another's courage. Through the hunt we discovered we were not singular beings moving through the world, but parts of something larger. Society sketched first by necessity, then by memory. It was also cognition shaped by scale. Planning against giants demanded imagination. One had to picture movements before they happened, anticipate choices of the herd, create strategies invisible to the present moment. Hunting mammoths required the seed of abstract thought, of projecting forward, of uniting past experience to future possibilities. In this ability, a shift occurred. We became not only creatures reacting to the world, but creatures anticipating it. The mammoth made us think further and deeper than perhaps smaller prey would demand. It became a teacher of foresight, forcing our minds toward patterns that still define who we are today. And spiritually, too, the mammoth pressed into us a sense of awe, a confrontation with mystery. The size alone evoked reverence, but its fall evoked questions. How could something so immense be brought down? What did the loss mean beyond hunger sated? Caves painted with their figures, ivory tusks carved into forms, rituals whispered around fire. All point not only to use, but to reverence. To kill a mammoth was not merely to feed a camp. It was also to touch fragility, power, and death in one moment. This act blurred into philosophy. What does it mean to live? What does it mean to take life? What does it mean to be small yet capable of felling giants? Identity was shaped in paradox. We were weak yet strong together. We were fragile yet enduring in patience. We revered the giant even as we slew it. We mourned even as we celebrated. In this paradox lay the beginnings of self-awareness deeper than biology. Humans became storytellers out of necessity, retelling hunts not only to teach, but to process, to affirm, to shape meaning. In doing so, the mammoth became our mirror. We looked into its eyes, and then into our own, and learned that our lives were not just about survival, but about interpretation. Scientists reading the records see the practical results. Marked bones, tools sharpened for flesh, shelters built of ribs. Yet layered beneath the material remains is something less tangible. The shaping of mind, of culture, of inner life. We became communities because of mammoths. We became thinkers because of the strategies they demanded. We became dreamers because their scale was too large not to inspire myth. So profound is this influence that even now, long after their absence, we find ourselves searching for them, retelling them, finding in their silence reflections of ourselves. Confrontation with giants is always also confrontation with limits. And perhaps this shaped our humility too, teaching us that identity is as much about recognizing boundaries as it is about imagining victory. The mammoth, strong yet fallible, vast yet mortal, taught us that nothing is secure forever. Not them, not us. In their presence and in their absence, we discovered we were both participant and witness in time's vast story. Their fall imprinted upon our identity the truth that survival comes not only from triumph, but from understanding fragility, from revering what can be lost. So when we say mammoths shaped humans, we mean more than diet, more than tools. We mean that in facing them, we traced the first outlines of being human at all. Cooperative, imaginative, spiritual, humble before immensity. Each hunt carried us deeper into that becoming. Each story told around fire carried it further. Mammoths live on within us because they helped make us what we are. We leave this reflection not in triumph nor in mourning, but in acknowledgement. The hunt was not a single act, but a place where identity carved itself across frost and memory alike. And when the fires burned after, when hunters and families gathered, it was through story and retelling that this new identity deepened further. For every cave painting, every whispered account, every reenactment around a flickering blaze was not only memory, but continuation of self. And it is to those firelit retellings that we turn next. The hunt shaped who we were, but it was around firelight that those shapes became lasting, passed hand to hand not as bone or tool, but as story. Imagine an Ice Age evening, cold pressing close outside, the air sharp enough to sting, smoke curling upward into a night sky fractured by stars, and campfires casting circles of warmth across the faces of a gathered group. Here, around this small trembling sun, survival transformed into memory, and memory into myth. It was in these retellings that identity took root, woven into words, gestures, and the flicker of flames dancing across stone walls and skin. Stories told around fire held not only detail, but meaning. They began as instruction how to stalk, when to wait, where mammoths moved. Young listeners learned that giants could be brought down if patience endured, if spears flew together, if fear was not allowed to scatter courage. Stories informed, but over time they also transformed. They folded awe and reverence into the telling. Victories became larger than life. Failures became lessons drawn into metaphor. The mammoth ceased to be only meat on snow. It became spirit, challenge, gift, reminder. Firelight blurred what was literal with what was luminous. It is here, in these quiet moments of warmth, that some of the earliest threads of culture were spun. The hunt itself was fleeting. A single kill soon blood and effort absorbed into necessity. But the stories endured. Each retelling thickened into ritual, into shared memory strong enough to bind generations. Children heard of hunts they had never seen, of mammoths that had fallen long before their birth. Yet the story carried the weight of instruction as if it were present. Memory stretched beyond experience. Through firelight, time itself bent. Archaeologists cannot hear the voices directly, but they find evidence in objects. The carvings etched into ivory, the cave paintings deep within, the charms that might have carried echoes of story. Symbols speak where words are gone, reminding us that myth was not invented later, but born here, beside fire, in the same moments when we remembered the mammoth. Through these stories, survival was given continuity, and continuity gave birth to identity not only as individuals, but as a species that dreamed aloud together. Consider the power of fire itself in this setting. Flames shift, flare, decrease, shaping changing figures against cave walls. As stories unfurled, shadows became part of their telling. Hunters may have gestured with spears, bodies moving with silhouettes, making the mammoth's charge come alive upon wall and rock. The very atmosphere became stage and memory became performance, an act of remembering that was also an act of creation. Could it be here that the boundary between memory and imagination first blurred, carrying us from survival into art? The presence of fire also meant safety enough to reflect. In the deep cold, with meat secured and danger temporarily distant, humans gained time to pause. Pausing allowed thought, and thought allowed story. Around fires, repetition built rhythm. A hunt retold dozens of times entered hearts as well as minds. It became myth not because facts changed, but because meaning grew. A spear thrown at a giant was never only a spear. It became courage, community, daring, destiny. We mold identity in the way we mold story, and firelight made both luminous. But firelight gatherings also preserved humility. Every kill was remembered, yes, but also every risk. Some hunters never returned. Some herds escaped. Some winters pressed harder despite victories. In story, we were able to make sense of loss as well as triumph. Perhaps mammoth figures on cave walls, painted deep in hidden places, were as much reminders of fragility as of glory. They held reverence, not boastfulness. Firelight was witness to grief as much as to pride. Through firelight, the mammoth entered time differently. Once, it was only a presence outside, looming, living, immense. In story, it became presence inside, intimate, lingering, almost eternal. Even after extinction, even after silence filled the plains, the mammoth walked on in firelight retellings, a companion as real to the mind as to the hunt. So strongly did it shape memory that even we, tens of thousands of years later, still carry it, speaking in softened tones about giants across snowy earth. Their story has never left flame. Look across the span of our species and you will see echoes still. Around hearths, around stoves, around modern fires, we continue to tell stories, passing identity forward. The mammoth hunt lives in us not as bone but as tale, as metaphor for facing what cannot be faced alone, for meeting immensity with courage borrowed from companionship. This is the lesson firelight preserved, that survival is temporary, but story endures. And so firelight retellings were not idle gatherings. They were the first libraries, the first schools, the first sanctuaries of meaning. They wove together what bone and flesh could not, continuity bigger than the hunt itself. Memory was transformed into narrative, and narrative into myth, shaping humanity's sense of who we are. The fire dims now in imagination. The figures lean back into silence. Embers crackle low. Stories pass into quiet, but not into absence. They linger within the people, carried into the next hunt, the next generation, the next century. The mammoth remains not only in silence, not only in dust, but in words rising again whenever we tell their tale. From here, we step from fire into ivory, toward the carved patterns left behind, the forgotten wisdom etched into tusks and bone, symbols that ask questions we cannot easily answer. From firelight stories, we step into objects that still hold their whispers, carvings etched into ivory, symbols cut into bone. These fragments remain scattered across Ice Age sites. Figures, lines, spirals, animals, and shapes whose meaning we can no longer pin. They are silent relics of thought too subtle to survive intact, shards of wisdom suspended in ivory, inviting us to wonder. Were they charms carried for luck? Were they prayers for hunts? Were they records, stories cut deep into matter when words dissolved into air? No certainty remains, only the carvings themselves, and our fragile attempts to read them. Mammoth ivory was plentiful, durable, and sacred in its abundance. When tusks were carved, it was not only for tools but for expression. The softness of fresh ivory allowed incising with primitive burins. The curves of tusks lent themselves to forms beyond the practical. And within those forms, humans experimented with meaning. Archaeologists uncover stylized animals, fish, horses, even mammoths themselves, scratched into shards of ivory. Other artifacts show geometric lines, tally marks perhaps, or designs with symmetry too deliberate to be accidental. Each symbol is a doorway into lost language. Science leans in. Microscopes reveal flake scars of tools. Radiocarbon dates anchor pieces in broad timelines. Comparative analysis links motifs across regions. Yet even with these, interpretation falters. No Rosetta Stone exists for Ice Age symbols. We see repetition, but we cannot decode. Were these lines calendars, tracking moon cycles or migrations? Were they incantations, meant to bridge life with unseen worlds? Were they nothing more than marks of beauty, the human impulse to decorate? The carvings resist our answers, holding secrets tightly, as if ivory chose to conceal as much as it revealed. And perhaps that concealment is itself wisdom. For in these objects we see the deep truth that not all knowledge survives, and that survival itself is not identical to understanding. The ivory preserved form, but not meaning. What endures is suggestion, an open invitation for imagination, not certainty. The mammoth tusk becomes both artifact and mystery, carrying echoes across millennia that hum softly but incomprehensibly, like the resonance of a sound felt more than heard. Philosophically, this unsettles us. We want history to speak clearly. We want knowledge to progress cleanly from past to present. Yet the carvings show otherwise. They remind us that identity is not only continuity but also forgetting. Humanity's story is as much about lost meanings as remembered ones. The ivory is wisdom we cannot reclaim, but it still shapes us. By teaching humility, reminding us how fragile expression is, how easily time erases context even when matter survives. Still, speculation comforts. Perhaps each carving was ritual, a charm taken into hunts, the way modern traditions carry tokens for courage before danger. Perhaps some carvings were maps, encoding rivers and valleys as abstract patterns, guiding groups across the shifting ice. Perhaps they were records of herds, seasonal counts, or births of children. Perhaps they were offerings, left not for humans but for forces beyond comprehension. Prayers etched into material taken from the very giants that gave life. Each possibility reflects facets of us, shards of thought mirrored back by the tusks. And it is moving to consider that, whatever their meaning, these carvings constitute some of the earliest art, the earliest writing, the earliest attempt to stop memory from dissolving. To cut lines into ivory was to insist. Let something remain, let something endure longer than voices, longer than breath. Even if we no longer understand, the act itself is sacred continuity, the refusal to accept silence unchallenged. There is also beauty in the material itself. Ivory is luminous, pale, holding light in a soft glow. It has the quality of permanence, yet under pressure it cracks, warps, fades. Its poetry lies in paradox. To carve wisdom into ivory was both to entrust and to risk. The marks may endure millennia, or dissolve into unreadable fracture. The mammoth tusk was canvas and collaborator. It carried human thought, but it also carried its own fragility, ensuring that time and entropy would shape interpretation alongside intention. So when we look at these carvings today, we glimpse an unfinished conversation. We hear voices without words, stories without endings, prayers without translations. They hover between knowledge and mystery, reminding us that not everything can be recovered, that some truths slip gently into silence while still gesturing toward us across the abyss of time. Forgotten wisdom is still wisdom, suspended long enough to make us wonder, long enough to teach us curiosity without resolution. We leave these ivory fragments quietly now, respectful of the silence they hold. They have given us suggestion, humility, and questions enough to carry forward. And as we set them down, we turn to the last herds themselves, those who endured longer than others, isolated and small on distant shores, carrying the very end of a story that began in thunder and ended in whispers. By the time most of the world had already fallen into silence without them, a few mammoths lingered, not in vast herds striding across endless plains, not in millions as their ancestors once had, but in small, fragile groups, marooned on distant islands at the edges of the Arctic. Wrangel Island in the far north, St. Paul Island in the Bering Sea. Windswept, austere, isolated places where giants shrank not only in number, but in body. These were the final herds, the last shadows of an age gone by, carrying their lineage like a fading echo. Their existence was marked not by thunderous migration, but by solitude. What once had been multitudes was reduced to hundreds, then to dozens, then at last to silence. Here the story of extinction feels different. It is no longer dramatic or sudden, not a single kill or a catastrophic collapse. It is quiet. It is stretched across centuries, creeping so slowly that perhaps those who lived among them did not realize they were watching the final giants. These small herds carried on, grazing tundra fields that no longer stretched beyond sight, circling waterholes without the accompaniment of countless kin, trumpeting into winds that answered back only in emptiness. The grandeur of their past had narrowed into endurance, delicate and sorrowful. Science helps us reconstruct this fading. Radiocarbon dating of the island remains shows mammoths surviving far later than their mainland relatives. Wrangel's mammoths existing until just 4,000 years ago, even into eras when humans elsewhere were already building cities, raising monumental stone, mastering metal. While pyramids stood in Egypt, mammoths still walked on Wrangel. Life overlapped in ways difficult to imagine, giants persisting at the edge of memory while history accelerated elsewhere. The world was already modernizing, yet an ancient being still tugged at grass beneath Arctic moons. But these survivors were changed. Their bodies show signs of genetic bottleneck, mutations born of isolation. Their size dwindled. Once mammoths towered. Here, they shrank, dwarfed physically as much as culturally diminished into memory. What had once been a species covering continents had now become a small group clinging to a last refuge. They were still mammoths in form, but in reality they were something in between, ghosts of their ancestors, pressed by scarcity, by isolation, by the thinning of time itself. Archaeologists debate whether humans still sought them in these distant places, or whether they lingered unseen, their final herds passing unnoticed into silence. On Wrangel, evidence of human arrival appears late, but it is not clear whether the people came during the mammoths' last years or after. Perhaps no human witnessed the very end. Perhaps instead they were remembered distantly, story outlasting presence. There is strange sorrow in the thought that the last of giants may have fallen without witness, their trumpets fading with no ear to record them, as if the earth absorbed their passing directly into silence. And still, memory persisted. Across cultures, stories endured of ancient beasts that once walked and then vanished. The myth grew precisely because their end was gentle, slipping too softly to notice, leaving behind not a catastrophic ruin but an unfinished story. It is as though the mammoth's ending created a vacuum, an absence that demanded filling with legend, carving itself deep into cultural spirit. Giants ended quietly, but memory roared on. There is humility in this. Extinction often conjures images of cataclysm, fire or flood or violence. But the ending of mammoths was layered with sorrow because it was gradual. It teaches us extinction can be silence too, a fading so delicate that absence only becomes clear once it is complete. How many species have we already lost in this way, slipped beneath noticing until their absence is permanent? The mammoth reminds us that death is not always spectacle. Sometimes it is simply the long narrowing of presence, until sound grows too thin, until dust carries all that remains. And as we reflect on those final herds, we return to wonder about ourselves. Did those last mammoths know anything of their solitude? Did they sense the absence of endless kin? Did they wonder why the valleys were quiet, why the tundra no longer shook? Or did they pass without awareness, continuing in routine until silence enveloped them entirely? We cannot know. But something in our grief at their end tells us we feel the silence more than they did, that the weight lies in the witness, or in the absence of one. Even so, remnants carry through. Their ivory still lies under tundra soil, their bones fragment through peat. The earth has preserved them, not as whole herds but as stragglers frozen mid-exit, last words not yet fully erased. And in these remains, imagination finds its strength again, asking if it was fate, or if it was accident, or if their story remains open even now, on the cusp of our own age. The final herds remind us that endings do not always come with final lines. They linger, incomplete, layered with sorrow not because of violence but because of gentleness. Giants did not vanish with drama. They slipped into silence slowly, which makes the silence louder, echoing now through our questions, through our longing. We leave Wrangell in our imagination as winds sweep its shorelines, as pale grasses bend under frost, as the last herd fades gradually into time. And as we step away from this ending, we feel entropy waiting in the wings, the patience of memory dissolving into dust, the steady unraveling of what endures until only echoes remain. This is where the story leads us next, into the entropy of memory itself, where what is forgotten becomes its own kind of presence. The last herds dissolved into silence on distant islands, and silence, with the patience of centuries, dissolved further into forgetting. For as time deepens, even memory itself succumbs to entropy. Stories once retold around fires fall away. Carvings lose their meaning. Bones fragment under frost until they become indistinguishable from soil. What survives is scattered, fractured across land and ice and question. Yet even fragmented memory teaches us. The story of hunting mammoths exists now as puzzle, half revealed and half erased. A portrait of history slowly dissolving even as it continues to shape who we are. Entropy touches everything. It is the slow unraveling written into the laws of the universe itself. Fire dies down into ash. Bones crumble into dust. Words fade unspoken. Lines of lineage sever quietly. Human memory is temporary, fragile against centuries. Hunting mammoths, those extraordinary moments that once defined entire generations, would have lived first as vivid presence, retold into story, transformed into myth. But myth too thins. Details vanish. Identity reshapes itself on new necessities. And somewhere along the long corridors of time, the giants walked out of human imagination, stepping away until only faint echoes lingered. Still, fragments endure. Archaeologists recover bones with lines of sharp incision, tusks etched into pattern, shelters framed by rib and femur. Ice holds frozen remains, soft tissue refusing decay. In ivory, we see marks of early art. In isotopes, we trace migrations long after they ended. None reveal the whole, yet together they create a mosaic, an archive both incomplete and somehow richer because of its gaps. For in the gaps, imagination steps in, and story is reborn. Entropy does not erase without remainder. It transforms presence into subtler forms, forms we must lean closer to perceive. The entropy of memory is paradoxical. It diminishes details while deepening meaning. Because the fine elements of the hunt are lost, what remains becomes emblematic, symbolic. Mammoths are no longer remembered for each scarcity, each chase, each wound, but as giants themselves, symbols of abundance, cooperation, awe. This distillation is a kind of survival. History reshapes as entropy works, boiling complexity down to essence. And in that essence, mammoths still live within us, not in clarity but in echo. Science allows us to push against forgetting, to coax details back from oblivion. Ice cores, isotopes, soil pollen, all conspire to reconstruct the breathing rhythm of the climates mammoths walked through. Genomes extracted from crumbling tissue allow us to glimpse identity written into code. But still, the larger story drifts between clarity and silence. Human memory cannot extend so far without scaffolding. And even science, precise as it is, reads only fragments of the script the earth preserves. Much remains unanswered, much uncertain. Perhaps uncertainty is itself part of the survival of memory. To remain a question is to remain alive. Philosophically, the entropy of memory mirrors the entropy of life itself. Our bodies age, our deeds are forgotten, and yet traces persist. Whispers in those who follow, fragments of influence woven invisibly into culture, soil, air. Mammoths remind us that survival is never absolute, but neither is forgetting. Something always remains, though altered, though faded, though incomplete. The persistence of fragments across millennia is proof that memory does not vanish. It transforms. Maybe this is why mammoths feel unfinished to us. We sense the entropy of their story, but also the stubbornness of its residue. What survives resists silence enough to remind us of everything lost. They are partly here, partly gone, partly remembered, partly blurred. And in that paradox, they resemble us too closely for comfort. For is this not what history will do to us? Fracture us into fragments, scatter us across artifacts, dissolve our stories until only shadows remain? The mammoth's entropy of memory is ours as well, delayed but inevitable. And yet, there is beauty in this slow unraveling. Dust retains whispers, fossils record echoes, stories ignite anew when read upon cave walls by modern eyes. Memory dissolves, but not fully. It leaves silence filled with suggestion, dust filled with potential. Like the faint warmth of a fire long after embers darken, memory radiates beyond visibility, softer but still present. Perhaps resilience lies not in resisting entropy, but in becoming part of its cycle, scattering into fragments that others may one day assemble into new meaning. So we walk now across tundras and museum halls, conscious of this dissolving. Each bone fragment, each ivory carving, each echo in the soil exists both as relic and as question. We cannot recover the whole, we are not meant to, but we can listen to the fragments as they remain, honoring their resistance, allowing their echoes to teach us that even as memory erodes, it still shapes. For hunting mammoths was more than survival. It was, and remains, the shaping of human history itself. We linger in this entropy now, aware of both loss and endurance, aware that silence too carries echoes. And as we look down at the ground beneath our feet, we realize the traces are still there, hidden in strata, in fossil beds, in layers of soil below. The earth itself remembers, even where we do not. What endures beneath our feet is not complete, not whole, but enough to whisper. They were here. They walked. They shaped you. And so from entropy of memory beneath our feet, we drift into that realization more deeply, that fossils are echoes, lying silently underneath us even now, waiting patiently for us to listen. Every step we take carries us unknowingly across ancient hunting grounds. Beneath our feet, invisible to us yet impossibly close, fossils rest in silence. They are echoes, reverberating across time, muted but present, fragments of memory that the planet has chosen to preserve. Every fossil is a voice, even if faint, telling us, with its persistence, that life once walked, once grazed, once thundered across the same ground we now cross without awareness. The earth remembers all of this, not loudly, not insistently, but quietly, through layers of stone and soil, through whispers that are only heard when someone chooses to pause and gently listen. A fossil is not life itself, but an impression of it, a shadow filled with substance. It is bone turned mineral, ivory turned stone, footprint hardened into permanence. It is absence somehow preserved as presence. In the silence of rock beds and shifting clays, fossils endure, not for us, but as part of the planet's memory. Each one feels like an echo trapped in solid form, a reverberation that continues not because it was intended to, but because geology works slowly, with patience. Entropy erases most things, but here and there, in rare alignments of chance, it preserves instead, pressing the record deeper rather than letting it be smoothed away. Among these echoes rest the mammoths, bones embedded in ancient river terraces, tusks rising through eroding soil, molars heavy as stones found in gravel beds. They lie beneath us not as curiosities, but as part of the land itself. A farmer plowing a field in Siberia may suddenly uncover tusk ivory pushing upward, revealed accidentally after millennia. Hunters walking tundra ridges may stumble on fragments of skull emerging from thawing permafrost. It is as if the earth itself occasionally exhales, releasing part of the memory it has carried for ages. The silence of the ground is deceptive, much like the silence of empty plains. What looks inert is alive with history. Walk any stretch of tundra or steppe, and beneath you may lie entire herds fossilized by flood or storm. The earth conceals not out of malice, but simply out of scale, the time scale of soil building, of dust gathering until layers compress themselves into the strata we stand upon. We speak of fossils as though they are separate, but in truth they are part of the foundation of the very places we inhabit. We live upon memory every day, standing unknowingly on top of echoes made solid. Science listens carefully to these echoes. By studying microfractures, by measuring isotopes, by comparing mineral replacements, paleontologists translate what bones have chosen to remember. A cracked molar becomes testimony to diet. A mark of stone against rib becomes proof of human presence. Even the density of mineral deposits in tusks carries clues about changing water sources, shifting climates, or periods of famine. Fossils may be fragile to the eye, but they hold detail woven far more deeply than story. They are not only echoes, but recorders. And yet, beyond science, there is something more, a sense that fossils embody the persistence of silence. They endure not because they call out, but because they wait. They ask nothing but patience. To find them requires time, care, stillness. They reveal themselves to those willing to pause beside the riverbank, to notice stone that feels heavier, different, meaningful. Fossils remind us that the earth remembers not on our schedule, but on its own. Its memory cannot be hurried, only discovered when it decides to let something surface. Perhaps the deepest lesson in these echoes is humility. We stride quickly over landscapes, measuring progress in years or decades. Fossils measure in millions, reminding us how small our footsteps are in contrast. Each time we hold a mammoth bone turned to stone, we hold time compressed, memory elongated far beyond human capacity. It is a perspective that humbles, a reminder that our own traces too will one day lie buried, part of a layer that future beings may, or may not, choose to listen to. Still, fossils are not silence alone. They are an offering, proof that life leaves something even in erasure. Every echo beneath us gives texture to the unknown, continuity to the forgotten. They show us that hunting mammoths was not merely an act of survival lost to time, but a story still alive in Earth's own archive. Whether or not we attend, the planet listens, records, remembers. Beneath our feet always something remains, and so we walk unknowingly across the memory of giants. Every stone may hold a fragment, every ridge, a hidden echo. The earth remembers in silence, waiting for us to recognize its patience. And as we listen to these soft echoes underfoot, we near the final truth of this story. That mammoths may be gone, but what we still carry from them, within our society, our imagination, our very being, endures in ways deeper than fossils alone. We close where we began, in wonder. The mammoths themselves are gone, their herds dissolved into silence, their bones eroded, their last footholds relinquished to sea and frost. And yet, their presence lingers. Not beside us on snowy plains, not within the tundra shadows, but here in us. For to hunt them was survival, yes. To face them was necessity. But to remember them, to carry them still, is something larger. In their enormity, in their patience and fragility, mammoths gave us more than flesh or fuel. They gave us cooperation, imagination, shared story. They gave us ourselves. Each step of their story threads through our own. Cooperation learned on the hunt became the seed of society. The planning of strategies became the architecture of thought. The awe evoked by their magnitude became art, symbol, and myth. Around firelight, retold hunts became memory passed between generations, shaping not only knowledge but identity itself. The mammoth was not only hunted. It was revered, painted, carved, transformed into shelter and ornament, into myth and mirror. Even in absence, it continues to offer a quiet lesson. Survival is more than endurance of the body. It is endurance of meaning. Consider how much of us was formed by these shared acts of survival. No single hunter could succeed against a mammoth alone. Our triumph came from unity, from roles distributed, from trust in one another. That lesson has never left us. Within our communities, our languages, our civilizations, there hums still the echo of mammoth hunts. We thrive not because of strength alone, but because of the ability to act, to fear, to hope as many together. Giants pressed this truth into us. By needing cooperation, they shaped our destiny. And then imagination carried it further. When hunts ended, when flesh was consumed, when bone became shelter, the mammoth still lived. In symbols upon cave walls, in patterns scratched into ivory, in whispers spoken beneath pale Ice Age moons. From practical event, meaning bloomed. The hunt became myth. The mammoth became more than an animal. It became an emblem of power and fragility, of life taken and life given, of the paradox that survival always requires loss. In carrying this forward into art, we became something greater than survivors. We became storytellers. Today we walk far from those winters, yet mammoths remain strangely close. Their bones rise from permafrost. Their DNA lingers half intact, drawing scientists into dreams of resurrection. Their stories are retold still on museum floors, in discoveries shared, in whispered speculation about what it would mean if giants walked again. Perhaps mammoths will return in some shadowed form. Perhaps not. Yet regardless of flesh, they walk with us already, threaded through our consciousness, carried in our story of becoming. They live wherever humans remember what it means to endure. Extinction, we know, is irrevocable, and yet, in another sense, nothing is entirely gone. Dust preserves whispers, isotopes capture breath, fossils echo quietly beneath us. Mammoths persist in material fragments, but more profoundly, they persist in what we still carry forward from them. They taught us patience, humility in the face of size, awareness of fragility, reverence before abundance. They taught us that survival means reciprocity. To take life is to weave it back into shelter, tool, and memory without waste. They taught us through loss that nothing is eternal, not even giants, not even us. From their vanishing, we learn how precious presence is. And so we find ourselves circling back to the question we began with: what if giants still walked? Perhaps they do, inside us, within our cooperation, within the myths that guide us still. Their true continuation is not in flesh pressing across snow, but in the rhythms we inherited because they once did. Like footprints pressed into ice and preserved, we carry the impression of them even after the step itself has melted. They are gone, yet their echo remains pressed into who we are. There is both sorrow and solace in this. Sorrow that they are absent, that no horizon holds their silhouettes anymore. Solace that they were never fully lost, because memory reshapes absence into presence. We close this story not with silence, but with recognition that giants shaped us, that we walk with traces of them in every act of trust, every gesture of care, every spark of imagination when we face uncertainty. Mammoths endure in us not because we choose them, but because they entered our story and have never left. And so, the planet's memory folds them gently into itself. Dust carries them, silence reverberates with them, fossils keep their patience, myths extend their shadows. We carry them above all else. Through survival, through imagination, through cooperation. Through story retold again and again until it becomes who we are. We close in wonder, as we began, remembering giants who are not here, but who live in every echo of our species. The mammoth's presence, though dissolved in body, lingers through us. In every campfire story, in every shared act, in every question about what was and what will be. They no longer thunder across frozen valleys. But in us, in our imagination and our togetherness, they will never truly disappear.